medical lab line of business. And
So there's got to be some way to make money doing that.
I turned you. Here, yeah, it sounds like it. I'm,
Making sure everyone's compliant.
yeah, but, well, and making sure that it is what it says it is.
Is Handy on?
Okay.
I guess that was my whole thing. Let's go.
Oh, we need another chair.
Is it sustained?
Do you want me to do that? Oh, I think it's a very broad advertisement.
Okay, so like,
Do we not, we need your nameplate, right? She's here, actually.
You're good.
She is. She's here tonight.
get informed maybe on that and see how it goes.
Let's go back.
Absolutely. You have to sit on the floor.
Yeah. Oh, we do need another chair. There's a Dan. Dan's together.
Our HR director is a Dan now too, so it's quite the club.
At one point, we had 3 Kates and 2 Bobs at the Historical Society.
Nice.
Yep. All right. Ready when you are. Are we on? We're on. Are you ready, Justin? Is your microphone on? Indeed it is. All right. We will call to order the April 18th, 2018 meeting of the Ferndale Planning Commission. We'll begin with it is 6:33 p.m. We will begin with a roll call of the commission.
Commissioners Goering?
Here.
Azar? Here. Martin?
Here.
Brazen? Here. Williamson? Farr?
Here.
Casio?
Here.
And Baker?
Here, Commissioner Williamson did let us know that he would be absent. Is there a motion to excuse his absence?
Motion to excuse.
Second.
Thank you. That was a motion by Commissioner Brazen with a second by Vice Chairman Farr. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. That motion carries. We will move on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda from staff or commission tonight?
I'll move we accept the agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you. That was a motion to approve the agenda as presented by Councilman Martin with a second by Commissioner Farr. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. That motion passes. We will now move to a motion to approve the minutes from, where's my date? Sorry, it's in my email. Barb, what was the date of the minutes?
I think it was the 21st.
There we go, March 21, 2018. Sorry, it was in a different place. Are there any changes, edits to the minutes from the meeting of March 21st, 2018? If not, we'll look for a motion.
I'll move to accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
Thank you. That was a motion by Commissioner Farr with a second by, was that Commissioner Brazen? Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. That motion passes. I'll move back to... There we go. We will move next to our call to audience. This is a chance for anyone in the audience to address the Planning Commission on anything that is not on the agenda tonight. There are 2 public hearings on the agenda tonight. There's a public hearing coming up on medical marijuana facilities ordinance amendments. There's also a public hearing coming up on residential district ordinance amendments. So if there's anyone here to address the Planning Commission on something other than those 2 topics, this would be your chance. You've got 3 minutes for anything you'd like to talk to us about that's not on the agenda. Just state your name at the podium. All right, moving on to our first public hearing. All right, our first public hearing this evening is on the proposed amendments to the medical marijuana facilities ordinance. This is the second time that this is coming before the Planning Commission for a public hearing. In this case, the Planning Commission is a recommending body. The City Council would be the final body, actually in both of these cases, because they're ordinance amendments. The City Council is the final body that would approve any changes to the ordinance. So we will start with an introduction from our city staff, and then I'll open the public hearing. And when it's time for the public hearing, everyone's got a chance to come on up to the podium to state your name and address for the record, or you can sign in and back as well. And you've got 3 minutes to address the commission on the topic of the medical marijuana facilities ordinance amendments. So we'll start with an introduction from our city staff. Hi, Justin.
Thank you. Good evening. I'll give a brief overview of everything that we've researched since the last meeting and provide a little bit of background from what we discussed at the last meeting. But on March 21st, there was a public hearing to talk about potential changes to the city's medical marijuana ordinance based on the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. We heard a lot of public feedback and had a lot of feedback received from the Planning Commission. And so staff has spent that time since then kind of going over a number of items. Generally, those items that were reviewed and requested by the Planning Commission were the overall number of facilities, the proposed zoning districts, the square footage requirements that were in the previous draft, consideration of the previously approved medical marijuana facilities that were approved through the previous special land use process, the overall licensing process, and then when should we come back and look at the ordinance after there's been some sort of evaluation period. So I'll just kind of go through what staff looked at for each of those items. As far as the type and amount of facilities, staff still is recommending to stick with one safety compliance facility and one provisioning center. That still gives staff in the city time to consider any potential negative effects or positive effects on these types of uses. This is largely due to the difference in the previous regulations, where previously we did have 5 under the old city ordinance, and that was kind of based on those facilities being limited, I believe, to 5 caregivers and the associated patients that went along with that. There wasn't really a proper amount of time to really evaluate how those facilities operated in the city, due to the limited number that opened and the limited time that those were or have been opened. Growers, processors, and secure transporters aren't being considered, and that's consistent with the previous public hearing. Staff did go back and take a look at zoning districts and the distance requirements for medical marijuana facilities. In your packet, there is there is a map that has the buffer distance requirements considering the existing ordinance. Specifically, the commission wanted staff to look at the office service district. So we did take a look at that. We did still feel that that was an appropriate district. There's really the office service district, there's few parcels really compared to the other zoning districts in the city. And the thought was that because of the existing daycare facilities that are nearby, and if we're going to continue with that distance requirement, there's really very few facilities located within that distance requirement. And since that is really the only true commercial and office district in the recommendation, this gives the city the ability to monitor and consider, if there's other commercial districts that might make sense in the future. Obviously, there's distance requirements that would go with other districts, other commercial districts, but just seeing how this could affect other land uses going forward. Generally, the site plan considerations, those are staying the same. However, staff did update the square footage requirement for provisioning centers, and we can kind of get into this more later, but generally we saw alignment with the definition of small retail establishment in the existing zoning ordinance, which is 5,000 square feet or less. So we're proposing that the maximum of 5,000 square feet of usable floor space would be for retail operations, and then the additional 5,000 square feet for a total of 10,000 square feet. So the entire operation could be 10,000 square feet, but retail, the maximum that the retail portion could be is 5,000. There's been expressed interest in educational facilities, reception area, storage, things like that. And so this clarifies the difference between spaces and kind of ensures that there's not sort of a mega facility, at least at the beginning of this ordinance. We took a look at the application process. Staff still recommends sort of option one. We laid out two options in the staff report and the packet. Option one still sets forth a process where once the city is opted in, applicants would pursue that state application process. And then, once a location meets the city's requirements in the ordinance, staff would review the application, and then Planning Commission would pursue approval. Option two allows for a little bit more local evaluation. So potentially, we went back and forth on the dates, and we could discuss this certainly, but it'd be a 30-day enrollment period that would allow applications to be submitted and scored by the Planning Commission under 5 categories. Those categories cover everything from location to the history of the operation in the city and noise, odor, possible effects on the neighborhood, an accurate business plan. So I won't go all through all 5 of these, but that's the general overview of those. And the Planning Commission would assign points for each of those categories. Like I said, there is more local control that is part of that option, but sort of the potential negative possibilities to this approach is that the city could be reviewing applications that might not actually ever receive state approval, and then the criteria may not always align with the state's review process. Regardless of the process, staff took a look at the conversation around permitted use versus special land use. The existing facilities under the old act are special land uses, as you're all familiar with. Staff's recommending permitted use. Staff shared the requirements for the state's review, and I think unless other folks have different additions to that list, staff felt that the state list covers off on most of the ground that we would probably look at locally as well. Sections in
Through the chair, can you clarify what that means? Permitted use under the special land use or under the new ordinance?
Under the new ordinance, medical marijuana provisioning centers and safety compliance facilities would be permitted, so they would only come to the Planning Commission. They would not go the extra step to the City Council.
So they would be outside of that one requirement that you started with?
It would be...
Here, the existing?
Yeah. Not the existing, but we said we were going to keep still one. The number is 1. That was the first point that you made.
That's the recommendation.
The recommendation. But then with these other 5, what are we doing with them?
They're remaining to the extent that they're operating within the context of their special land use approval.
Just the special land use approval.
That's right, as provided in this draft. But for the clarification, those applicants could also potentially, if the recommendation were to use option 2, could submit an application to be considered for whatever the ultimate number is as it relates to a provisioning center.
Thank you.
And then lastly, we did add a section to consider evaluation of the ordinance. So essentially, the city manager or the designee would provide a report to City Council 9 months after a facility has opened and been operating a provisioning center, and then there would be a recommendation from that report that's covers everything from should there be more, should there be different regulations and local control on that for these types of facilities.
And any amendment to the ordinance would come back to the Planning Commission and then back to the...
Right, yep. So public hearing at the Planning Commission and then City Council for consideration after that. Yep. Other than that, staff did receive 2 letters that were provided through email and then printed as well. And then also a few binders from an existing operating facility in the city that had information about their business and considerations about the number of medical marijuana card holders in the state of Michigan by county and some additional information there. Other than that, here for any other questions.
All right, we'll get to the public hearing. Thank you, Justin. Get back to my agenda. All right, we will open up the public hearing for the medical marijuana facilities ordinance amendments. As we did last time, we will take, or as we do every public hearing, we'll take all of the public comment during the public hearing. So folks come up to the microphone, please state your name and address for the record. You've got 3 minutes to share. I'll give you a warning when we're getting close to or slightly over the 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission. And we'll take all of the public comment in a row. We won't sort of stop and answer questions during public hearing. This is your chance to give public comment to the Planning Commission. After we close the public hearing, we'll work back through either with our planning department staff or our city attorney who's joined us as well to attempt to answer any questions that may have come up, and then the commission will deliberate up here as well. So with that, we'll start with opening the public hearing at 6:47 p.m. Welcome. Hi.
Hello. Is that too close, or is that
No,
good?
that's
Okay,
perfect. Thank you.
Can I begin?
Please.
Okay. Hi. My name is Mike Gorney. I'm a resident of Ferndale for 2 years now. I'm here to speak on the medical perspective of this ordinance for medical marijuana. I worked in spinal cord and traumatic brain injury for going on 6 years now, and I personally have seen the benefits that medical marijuana provides to this population. We all know that this stuff works for glaucoma, back pain, for relatively healthy individuals with minor problems, but I'm speaking on behalf of more of an unknown population, and that is the population with catastrophic injuries. It can help with a lot of different pain issues with them. If you've ever experienced nerve pain, but it can be debilitating, and it can at least help moderate that for them on a daily basis. And without that product, they are dealing with either going to opioids or other drugs, regardless of the medical marijuana. So if you're going to choose between opioids or medical marijuana, which one would you choose? I think nowadays the answer is pretty clear. Excuse me. Other than that, the closest facilities are, in my opinion, are in Detroit. And being a resident of Detroit for 3 years, I have seen where the locations on a lot of these facilities are. They're not in very safe neighborhoods, and they're not in very good areas. I don't want to speak to the infrastructure of the roads, but, a lot of the roads in Detroit are pretty crummy. And if you're driving a modified van on those roads, it's just not a safe situation. You're in a bad neighborhood. You're in a beat up van as it is. You hit a pothole, your car, your tire blows. You're just stuck there. So again, speaking from a medical perspective, speaking from someone who's lived in the areas where these facilities are, I find that if we were to open up one in Ferndale, you provide a great service to this population, and you'd provide a lot more safety to them as well. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, welcome.
Hi, my name is Deborah Young, 440 West Troy, and I'm really here speaking as a patient and a 10-year resident of the city of Ferndale. I am a glaucoma patient, and I have been using cannabis to treat severe pressure headaches from glaucoma for a number of years. I would like to talk about safe access. It's very important when people have medical issues that they have access to their medicine. And it's very difficult when you live in a city where you know that 3 times the residents of the city of Ferndale have voted for legalizing medical marijuana. 3 times, and 1 time for recreational marijuana. The citizens are overwhelmingly in favor of safe access for patients. So I don't know why we are limiting access to patients. We should be expanding access to patients. As a patient, I love the walkability of my town. I don't have any mobility issues. My issue is glaucoma. I would love to walk around my town, do a little shopping, pick up my medicine, go out for dinner. Now I have to drive, if we open something here, I'm going to have to drive over into an industrial area. If you go into other cities, go into Ann Arbor and see some very upscale dispensaries, the Ohm of Medicine, sitting right in downtown Ann Arbor with no problems whatsoever. I think it's also something we should look at. We had a chief of police who raised a lot of hysteria here when we first brought this issue up of dispensaries. He's gone now. I don't think that the things that he was talking about would occur here in Ferndale. This is a medical facility. We're not talking about a party atmosphere. We're not talking about a bar. This is a medical facility where people will come and pick up medicine. People cannot grow this medicine at home in a suburban area because of the restrictions of the state law. You can't grow outside because you can't be able to see that from the street. Your neighbors aren't able to see it. You can grow a small amount inside your home. It's a roughly 4-month process from seed to actual use of the medicine. It's really impossible. Most patients need to access a dispensary in a safe area. Ferndale has always been welcoming. We've been a progressive city. We're known as being a progressive city. Why are we moving backwards on this issue? I don't understand it. Other cities are moving forward. We're running away from it. It doesn't make any sense. To live in Ferndale has always been a progressive city. We've always been proud of that. Let's keep that. Let's acknowledge that people need these medical facilities. Let's create safe access for patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Welcome. Hello.
Hi, good evening. My name is Marcy Lovelace. I am a representative from the business located at 930 East Lewiston. I'm here tonight to talk and speak on behalf of the business formerly known as Sea Gardens. We have changed our name over to Ferndale Community Gardens as we are one of the 5 caregiver centers previously approved by the city. Our team has read through the new changes that the Planning Commission is recommending for the ordinance, and we are very happy to see that some of the changes that Planning Commission has made. Yet, we still are hoping that the Commission would consider for more than one provisioning center as it's recommending right now. Ferndale has a current population of 20,100 as of 2017, according to Wikipedia. Looking at states that have already been operating with the cannabis industry, such as Colorado, they have an average of 1 dispensary for every 1,500 residents. Now, we're not certainly saying that Ferndale should adapt to those practices as Colorado has, but it does show that the one provisionary center may not be able to handle all of the patients that it needs to service. It also brings a lot of traffic to just one area of Ferndale, which was one of the concerns at the last meeting. Another thought we need to consider is only allowing one provisionary center is dictating where Ferndale patients will go to receive their medication. It's not allowing a medical patient any choice in how they obtain their medications. It's like enforcing an HMO system right on the city right from the get-go. Also, it's important to note that this is a new industry coming to the city as well as to the state. If the city decides to only allow one provisioning center and say that provisioning center does not pass inspection by the state and they're closed, what is the alternative for the patients in the city? We feel allowing the 5 already established caregiver centers to be vetted by the state and then vetted again by the city will eliminate a lot of headaches or extra resources that the city would need to pull if they open applications to the public. We have already seen these problems that have happened in other cities such as Lansing and in Detroit. Also, with the city vetting the 5 caregiver centers already approved, this allows the city to be able to come on site during this process to see up close and personal how things are going. We appreciate you listening to our concerns, and we hope that you take them into consideration with going forth with the new ordinance. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy. We did receive the binder as well. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Yep, we've got them here. Thank you. Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Hi, my name's Elijah Nelson. I live at 516 East Maplehurst. I just have a brief statement prepared here. I just wanted to voice my support of medical marijuana provisioning centers and the expansion of them. I think they'll be beneficial to the city, myself, as well as neighboring cities and their residents as well. There are a lot of medical marijuana patients in this city and surrounding, and they would greatly benefit from the available access to safe locations to get their medication. And I think that should be something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, welcome.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank the board for their time and hearing all the people who came to speak today in support and opening dispensaries in the area for the patient's right to legal, lab-tested medicine and safe, certified facilities. I would also like to thank the Michigan Health Collective for having me out to speak tonight. Michigan Health Collective has heard concerns of the community, residents, and worked closely with new requirements and laws requiring medical marijuana facilities, and proposed location also meets the city ordinance requirements for zoning district and distance requirements as well. Adequate space for parking in a discrete location that was picked specifically because it was out of sight of the main commercial areas of Ferndale's downtown and main attractions, in a more discreet location near the border of Ferndale. In a recent study, it was shown that 13% of doctors and medical staff were ever taught about the endocannabinoid system and how it regulates the body's homeostasis and many functions of the ECS, and how it affects and regulates how we regulate a variety of biological processes such as relaxation, feeding, sleep, certain inflammatory reactions, and cognitive function. As mentioned before, people in wheelchairs don't have any access to medicine, and these roads in Detroit, they're just not going to cut it. There are people that simply cannot walk, simply cannot have a ride given to them. They need access to legal medicine. And without this access, they have to, like spoken before, turn to opioids, which is a terrible, terrible decision. Recently, evidence has accumulated in stimulation of cannabinoid receptors by either THC or endocannabinoids influence the intracellular events controlling the proliferation and apoptosis of numerous types of cancerous cells, therefore leading to anti-tumorous effects in both in vitro and in vivo, which means the anti-cancerous of these cells, it makes it eat itself. It eats the cell quickly, and we don't know what else does that for cancer. There are many other people that are going without. We just ask the board to please understand these patients need access to legal lab-tested medicine. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Hello. Welcome.
My name is Jacqueline Langwith, and I'm here from Polichel and Associates, Cannabis Attorneys of Michigan. I believe you do have a letter. I'm going to briefly summarize the points from the letter. Our client is Michigan Health Collective, one of the existing facilities in Ferndale. As one of the previous speakers mentioned, the ratio of population to provisioning centers in Ferndale would be 1 to 20,000 or so. You have 9 active pharmacies here, so you're comparing pharmacies where you can get opioids versus a place where you can get medical marijuana. It's okay to have 9 pharmacies, but it's not okay to have more than 1 provisioning center. Also, if you look at other cities or townships in the state that have already opted in, there are 3 that we're aware of, and we are keeping track of everything. Crockery Township, Tobacco Township, and White Cloud that only allow 1 provisioning center. All of those municipalities have populations of 2,500 or less. Adrian allows 10 provisioning centers in 2 different commercial districts, and then they allow them unlimited in an industrial overlay. Adrian has 20,000, a population of 20,800, similar to Ferndale. Ypsilanti is 20,500. They allow 7. Owasso, smaller than you, they have a population of about 14,700. They haven't adopted their ordinance yet, but their cap right now is 4. Hazel Park, it's 3. So you would, for a population of 20,000, to have just 1 provisioning center does not make sense. Especially because there's no empirical evidence at all for the reason that it's limited to 1, the traffic problems and the public safety concerns. There's absolutely no evidence to show that provisioning centers have public safety concerns. And in fact, if you want to have traffic issues, put 1 provisioning center in and have 20,000 people trying to go to that 1 provisioning center. The other thing is competition. You're going to pick and choose the winner and the loser, okay? You're going to pick one provisioning center for the residents and say this is the only place you can go. You're going to foster poor product and low quality public service because they don't care. They are the one. They know that they've got a monopoly. Why should they try to do better? They don't have any competition. You've already chosen that one facility is going to be here. Finally, we understand that you are trying to be fair to everybody, but the existing facilities here have been here. They've invested in your community, and they've not received any return from that. They've been here, they're in the proper zones, they've been vetted, they've been permitted, they've been inspected. We think it's fair to your citizens to let them have preferential treatment. This has happened in Ann Arbor, Detroit, and Flint, where they're grandfathering in existing facilities. Your community has spoken that they want medical marijuana and they want access to medicine. The best way to give your citizens what they want is to get these facilities operated and keep them operating, and the best way to do that is to allow these 5 facilities to be grandfathered. Finally, we just think you're going to be creating a problem where none exists if you just have one provisioning center. We urge you to not have any cap at all. Let the market figure out how many facilities. You can put distance between provisioning centers so that you don't have a saturation. But if you're not going to do that, we urge you to allow those 5 facilities who are already here, been community members, been in this community, have patients that need them. We hope you, we urge you to give them preferential treatment and to allow 5 provisioning centers in community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I know it's out of order, but may I ask a question to clarify a point in the letter?
Sure.
Council, how would you've listed a number of cities here that indicate they've already opened provisioning centers, but you don't speak to all of their limits. What does Flint and Bay City cap it at?
Well, actually, Flint has not. They're just in a draft right now. Pardon me? But
I'm just reading that
okay.
You indicate that dispensaries have opened in Flint and Bay City.
There's actually some temporarily operating. None have been actually licensed by the state yet. The dispensaries that are operating right now are what are considered Rule 19 facilities. They're operating under state regulations. They're allowed to operate while they seek their licensing, as long as they're in a municipality that allows them to do that.
So Bay City doesn't have a limit yet either?
Bay City does not have a what? They have a limit. Either? I believe it's 25. They allow 25 provisioning centers in Bay City.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Good evening. Paul Weisberger, a 6-month resident of Ferndale and part owner of Oasis Wellness Center. I think there's been a lot of great comments, and I just want to touch upon a few in my 3 minutes that I have. It's not black or white or binary. It's not right or wrong. I think there's absolutely a concern to have too many licenses in a community. For instance, Bay City, which was just mentioned, I think has done a very poor job in allowing for 25. Despite that, we're going to be there, but it's going to be a bloodshed. We're going to have to spend a lot of time and money and energy proving ourselves to be the best or one of the best, and Darwinism, capitalism will kick in. But I'm a firm believer that that creates a situation in which desperate people, wounded animals, cornered animals, whatever analogy you want to make, do desperate things, and that breeds criminality. I can tell you that 5 in Ferndale I'm extremely comfortable with. I think 5 in Ferndale with not just your immediate population, but also, let's be honest, we're not going to have provisioning centers in Bloomfield Hills or Bloomfield Township, probably not going to have any in Birmingham in the foreseeable first wave, maybe on Eaton Street later. So Ferndale is going to become the progressive, fun, cool place, forward-thinking community where people will feel safe to travel down and get their medicine. And they probably aren't going to go another mile past to 8 Mile. And so you're going to see a population draw, and we're businessmen. I mean, I think there's a lot of great discussion about the medicine. I'll leave that to the people that know a lot about that. But we're entrepreneurs, and Ferndale absolutely has a market that goes beyond just its borders. And you will see that these 5 provisioning centers, if you were elected to go that number, will not be wounded animals, will not be desperate, should treat their license as a golden ticket, one that they value, one that they make sure that all their employers are following their law and following their provisions, rules, and procedures. And I think I say that with absolute comfort. I always have said I would rather be one of 2 and fight the vetting process than be, one of 25. I'm not here just to raise the number up so that I can assure myself of a better odd of getting the license. I think Ferndale will be just fine with 5. And on that note, you guys have already gone through the vetting process as it relates to people spacing themselves, going in the right districts. I will be the first to admit, as a planning commissioner myself and a former city attorney, that we do need to look at land use. What we were approved for was for a caregiver facility with a smaller amount of parking. I think you do need to go back through the system, whether it be as a permitted use but in front of the Planning Commission. I think you do need to evaluate whether you have the right amount of parking. And on that end, for our facility, we're securing a parking easement to the south with a great deal of parking. But I can appreciate the Planning Commissioner's comments that needs to be taken into account. So my proposal would be that you allow for 5, the 5 that have already gone through the process. And let me be clear, it was made very clear to us that being approved in those caregiver facilities granted us 0 rights to be a provisioning center under the MMFLA. But I can tell you almost every single one of those 5 did it in anticipation. I was the honest enough one to tell you that was my goal. But I have no problem with going back through the process, demonstrating that we have the parking, that we're in the right district. But you've already gone through the process of spacing these 5 out and reviewing those applicants. So why create the mad gold rush to the front door or the concern over how we're going to vet these out with some point systems, which I appreciate that more than the race to the front door. You've already got them. I would run through those 5, have them go through a review process in front of the Planning Commission, demonstrate that they have enough parking for the new concept that they have. It is marijuana, but it is now a much greater customer base. And if they meet that, grant them the license to be an MMFLA license. Not because we earned it or we're crying, crocodile tears and we deserve this, but because you've already done it and it is in the right place. These are places we've invested, bought. We've spent over $100,000 in rent preserving that spot. I think it's the right spot to be. And I would hope we could have that opportunity. And to the extent all 5 didn't get approved, I'm almost done. To the extent all 5 did not get approved, whether that only 2 got approved, 3, 4, then you would have an at-large permit application that you could then announce that you are going to start accepting applications for that remaining permit. But that to me would eliminate some of the legal issues and concerns about who we're going to select, go through that process in the right zones with the right number. 5 is fine. And with that, I would end my comments. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Richard Barron. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Foley, Barron, Metzger, and Yipe. I submitted some information for the Planning Commission's consideration, and I have a few comments on those items that I submitted as well. First of all, if in fact you do decide to go with an option system, we would suggest that option number 2 is better than option number 1. The reason being that option number 1 just creates a mad rush, but also requires people to spend a lot of money going through the state evaluation process, which is not a lightly, undertaken process. At least with option 2, there is significantly more local control. There's local input. It gives the Planning Commission the opportunity to evaluate applicants and to rank them, and then they still have to go and apply to the state and go through that entire vetting process. But there's been more input at this level where you can evaluate, prior business practices, what you know about the operations that an individual or business already has within the community, local compliance issues, things like that. So we think that would be an important consideration. However, there is an open question, and Council mentioned it earlier with regard to and other commenters have as well, with regard to the special land use issue for those 5 that are there. And because there appears to be some inconsistency within the proposed draft, it is unclear as to what those 5 SLU grantees would be able to do now. Would they be able to go ahead and apply to the state saying they had special land use approval? Now the MMFLA has come into play and they want to go with a provisioning center, for instance, or do they really have nothing other than a place for people to meet? So there's been further discussion on that already tonight, but either way, that needs some clarification. As to the ultimate number of facilities within the community, that's a matter for local control. 1 may be way too few. 5 or 6, at least for starting out, probably is about right. 25 is probably too many, but that's more of a judgment call than anything else as opposed to a legal call. If, in fact, the commission does do a ranking system, we would suggest that there be no ties, so that if you accept applications for a certain window period of time, you vet those people, and if you make an internal decision that we need to have 90 plus as a score before we're, as soon as we get to however many we want, 10 for instance, with a 90 plus score, then we're going to stop. Then those people that receive that score could decide, hey, I'm the last one on the list. Do I really want to apply? I'm the first one on the list. Well, I'm certainly going to apply. So they could decide whether they wanted to spend the money with the state and go through that whole process. Maybe they are looking at another community, maybe not. Maybe Ferndale's the only place they want to be. But at least it gives people more input as to how they can control their own destiny, whether they should go forward or not. In terms of confidentiality of submittals, absolutely, because that's got business information, there's security information, things like that. That should for sure be kept confidential. On disposal, I made a technical comment there that you should be talking about any cannabis infused product, whether it's flower or extract, but really probably the easier way to address that is to simply indicate that any licensed facility within the city limits has to comply with whatever requirements the state has in place relative to disposal of unused or degraded product or otherwise, rather than interjecting yourselves into that particular point. The state's going to have a pretty robust and does have a pretty robust regulation. They're going to want to know what people are doing. I guess it's a matter of local consideration whether you want to put on additional requirements, but the state will probably have that handled, and you just may be getting into an area that you don't necessarily need to because it's already covered. In terms of some of the timing, I believe it was with option 1 where it talked about a COO or certificate of occupancy at the time of the application. That seems to be putting the cart before the horse, because if in fact someone wants to enter into this business in a particular location, then as I read that regulation, the proposed ordinance, they would have to spend a boatload of money to make sure their facility is all built out, that they had all the inspections, that they have the local permits, everything else to get their COO. And then the state may say, well, we don't like your plan, we don't really like your fire suppression, it's not quite what we were looking for, your security system isn't quite right, etc. And then they're kind of back to square one where they've already spent the money. It would seem to make much more sense and be, frankly, kinder to the applicants, and and business-wise, it just is more logical to allow them to go to the state once the city has made whatever decision it's made, to allow an applicant to go to the state, go through that entire vetting process, the pre-qualification process, and then if they have a location, then the second part of the process. And then the state says, okay, you're fine with what you've planned. The city still has the ability on the back end to say, well, we're only going to give you the COO if you comply with the requirements. But then they're not doing a build-out that they otherwise may not need to do.
I'm going to give you a 30-second warning.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think that I really don't have anything else. So
Okay.
I will just leave those 20 seconds hanging out there. Thank you very much, and thanks for considering the comments in the letter.
Thank you, Richard. Yep, we've got the letter right here. Thank you. Are there any other comments for the public hearing this evening? Again, the Planning Commission is a recommending body in cases like this. The City Council, there would be another public hearing at a City Council meeting where there would be additional discussion on this. All right, last call. All right, seeing no other commenters at this time, we'll close the public hearing at 7:15 p.m. We will look to our city staff. Justin and Dan, you guys just let me know who's got the right answer to a couple of these, because I'm not sure. I know you've been working on this for a long time, so let's pitch it to Dan when needed. So there were a number of comments about, the potential size of the market or number of people in Ferndale. And what's the law around who can obtain a medical marijuana card? I mean, there are 20,000 people in Ferndale, but there's a good number of those under 18 or under 21. What's the law about how old you have to be, or is there one?
I'll lead on Dan for that.
I believe you have to be 18, but I'm not, at the moment, I'm sure that people from the audience probably have more insight as to the specific application to become a qualified patient, and I don't want to misstate that for the board. But I certainly agree with you as it relates to it being some subpart of the city population, and the point is valid. I believe that there will be qualified patients that from other adjacent communities that would wish, for some of the reasons noted, safety, good roads, who may wish to exercise the choice in Ferndale if given that option.
Right, that was actually my next question, was there isn't anything barring anyone from, because when I looked at actually some of the information here from what used to be Sea Gardens, and I've just forgotten your new name, unless it's on the front, Ferndale Community Gardens. Looking at the cities, it looks like there aren't currently a lot of cities in Oakland and Wayne counties that permit this, but those that do are relatively close to us, particularly Hazel Park and Detroit.
Right.
Okay. All right, just wanted to make sure I understood. So our market area, when we talk about one provisioning center here, 3 in Hazel Park, some additional number in Detroit, sort of our 8-mile corridor, or maybe south of 10-mile corridor, whatever we want to call it.
I think Southfield's looking at still studying the issue, but hasn't decided.
Okay. Southfield hasn't decided?
I don't believe they have decided.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Just in terms of better understanding that market area. So I had a question about safety. We know we have a walkable community. We know that this is something that really commissioners Azar and Brazen have taught me over the years. Anything that we permit in terms of reviewing a site plan will include accessible parking spaces, will include sort of safe access to doors and sidewalks, and we work really, really hard at that. But there were a couple of comments that came up about safety and why Ferndale might be preferred because we are a safer or more easily navigable space than other cities. I wondered, is any comment on, I'm not asking you to bag on other cities, but any sort of thought or comment on us being a preferred location and needing to take advantage of that?
I mean, that could be a perception, thing. I think that perception is changing in regards to the cities around us as well, just like it has for Ferndale over the years. So I can see that being a discussion point. I'm not 100% concerned with that, but.
But to our knowledge, any site plan review that's going on in Hazel Park is going to take some of these similar things into consideration about legal requirements around ADA accessibility. And
sure.
Just to the best of your knowledge.
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. There were then a couple of other very specific questions when we get into really looking at the nitty-gritty of the options and the ordinance language. I'm going to come back to a couple particularly that Richard just brought up at the end. But I think the big question tonight was around the number of centers, the number of uses and the types of uses. I think the location of uses has been well established over the years in terms of the districts, but wanted to get the sense of the commission on a conversation about permitted use rather than special land use, as well as locations, and see, before we kind of dive into specifics around option 1, option 2, or specific language. general thoughts on where things are located, on whether it should be a permitted use versus special land use, or are you comfortable with the recommendations?
I, for one, am comfortable with the recommendations that have been laid out in front of us at this point.
Okay. For the locations and the
Yeah,
permitted use?
absolutely.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend going back down that road.
Thank you. That's how I'm just trying to, like, what are the things we've got consensus on, and then
Sure.
we'll dive into some
Sure.
of the specifics. It's very helpful. I had one question. So Justin, in terms of making this a permitted use, and this may go a little bit to, if I understood Dan's question earlier, this may touch on that. If this is a permitted use in a district and there aren't any major modifications, they're in compliance with parking and all, potentially we're not going to see these, are we?
I think,
Need site plan approval if it was a new.
If it needs it.
yeah.
That's
and
right.
Well, and if I may, and it also depends on which option we choose for vetting. If we go with
That's a
option
great point.
2, it's going to come back here.
That's a great point. But typically in a permitted use, let's leave option 1 and 2 aside, if they've met all the requirements for administrative approval, it's not coming back to the planning commission.
Typically, but in the site plan approval section, it allows for the CED director to send any site plan that they wish to the planning commission. I think this type of use would qualify for that.
Well, it's the CED's director's birthday, so perhaps we don't need it.
Right.
What?
It's his birthday.
Oh,
That's why we put this here today.
Yeah, just,
didn't get it. Happy birthday. Happy birthday, George.
But I think in most cases, it would be an intensification use of what is there. Or the modifications would be enough. So I'm not too concerned with that. But
So if it was one of the 5 that has already gone through this process, and if everything, still complied with updates to the ordinance under option 1, potentially we wouldn't see anything back here unless city staff decided to exercise that right and bring something specifically back.
I think correct. I
Okay.
think we would
I just
recommend. We
wanna
would
make sure I understood.
probably recommend they all come to planning commission because they're under the old model with the limited number of caregivers and the limited number of patients. Now you're increasing that to unlimited. So I think in all instances we would bring those back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. What do you want to jump to first?
I have one question, and then I, of course, have a page of comments and thoughts. The one question is, I'm sorry, you probably said it, I missed it, but in your last component, you talked about how long for reevaluation. What did we settle on?
9 months
9 months.
is the.
I know I missed it.
Is the
somewhere.
I don't know if I
recommendation.
actually said it. So
Okay, thanks.
You did, and that's the recommendation. Is
No, I
9
hear you.
months, correct?
Okay.
Okay.
That being said, I wonder if that's an appropriate amount of time as far as, is that too long of a period to be evaluating these or not?
I certainly wouldn't go any longer. The number I was kicking on was 6 to 9.
Okay.
Of operation, and I think we should be able to make an evaluation by then. I can live with either of those. I think staff recommendation of 9 is fine to me, considering some of the other changes I'd like to suggest down the road.
Well, and just remember that realistically, if you got a report at 9 months, it means you're probably getting a 9-month report is probably coming to you in month 10, and then there would need to be public hearings in order to amend language. So you're really talking about effectively a year.
That's why I said I wouldn't go any longer than 9.
I just wanted to make sure it was something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Point.
So in terms of, I'll just go straight through the points in the memo that we got from the city. And the first point was around the staff's recommendation on the type and amount of facilities. That was a big conversation last time. It's obviously a big conversation among our public commenters. And the staff is recommending the same as last time, 1 safety compliance facility and 1 provisioning center.
If I may, I think there's a couple of those points that are related. The total number and the 5 that have already been approved. And so I'd like to take up the conversation of both of those, at least briefly, if I may.
Please.
Okay. So here's, I first off, kudos to city staff. I think this is a difficult issue. We sent it back to rework after a whole bunch of work, and I think you guys have done just a superb job. So thank you in helping us navigate this really difficult issue. Where I draw a little bit of difference with what you're recommending is the number to open. One is too, in my opinion, too few. I also have, and I went on record last time, an issue with in any way, shape, or form carte blanching the 5 we've approved, and here's why. The city's intent and council's intent and the planning commission's intent was to help patients. Not all 5 of those, I appreciate the investment in the city, not all 5 of those even came close to opening. Some tried to open in good faith, and whether political climate or law enforcement climate shut them down, and I think that's a shame because it got away from our intent to help patients. I think 1 is too few, but I do want to give some consideration to those that did make a good faith effort to open, was not engaged in speculation, and did try to open, but because of the climate couldn't. So my recommendation would be to allow a total of 3, use option 2 to vet the applicants, and include a categorization in there that would give preference, not absolutism, but preference to those facilities that made a good faith effort in opening. Because it is my belief, and no one's been able to prove it differently, not all 5 of those are created equal. So I want to give preference to those that did come in and made an honest effort to help patients, which is our policy goal all along. And then look at 1, above 1, go to 3 total with new applicants, and the 5 can apply as well. Use option 2 to vet it with that criteria for those that tried to open, and then reevaluate in 9 months to see. And if it's not arduous, we open more. It'll never be 25. I was born in Bay City. God love them, but I couldn't see that. But I think 1's too small to get out of the gate, and we have no evidence that there's a huge detraction that 3 would be any more birds. So that's my initial parlay vote.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission on type and number of facilities?
Through the chair. Justin, what was the intention of leaving out the other 3 categories of license holders? Was there thought behind that? What was the basis for?
I'm sure there was thought.
Well, of course there's thought behind it, but what was that thought? And why do we not? I mean, when I'm looking at these 5 categories, they work together is what the intention of the state was. Having a secure transporters. To me, I don't understand why we leave that out when if we're going to have provisioning centers, they're going to have to obviously have transportation of safe transportation. So can you talk us through why we got to just opening 1 of each as the recommendation?
Sure. So staff from various departments got together, and we kind of talked about, we started from there, right? If we had all 5, what would that look like? Not having an example nearby, we just used our best judgment and talked about a lot of things. We toured some facilities. Some were more well-run than others. But essentially, we had said, with grow operations, it seemed like I won't single out specific departments, but some had felt that the noise and odor, or not noise, but odor specifically, could be an issue because of the proximity of residential next to industrial and next to the office service districts. Unless you're in the heart of the industrial center, you're pretty much a block away from residential. So I don't think that we ever got a clear distinction that the smell would not be an issue. And we've had smell being an issue with grow operations in like single-family homes, which is different, and you can probably judge some of the expertise on some of those different grow houses, some being better than others. But so that was part of the discussion with grow operations. Secure transporter, a lot of that was concern for safety. In that, what type of operation would those be? Would it be like a Brinks truck that's armored that's transporting these facilities back and forth? I think we've seen more examples probably since the first ordinance was reviewed, but that was part of that. And then is it the processor is the last one. A couple of departments had some fire-related concerns and operations with that. Though it was probably not a very professional facility, there was a facility on Hilton that blew
Just
up.
had a
That was
fire.
that was operating illegally, and some of our staff is pretty trained in those sorts of emergencies, and they had strong concerns about the potential explosive nature of those types of facilities. That's the short version for those three, but we tried to start from scratch, looking at all five, rather than just going with what was previously in the previous ordinance.
Tangential to your question, I just want to make a comment about my comments. I don't think I was clear enough. When I said three, I mean 3 provisioning centers and then the one additional other type. So just to be clear.
Thank you. Commissioner Burke? You have the floor.
Yeah, no, that's all. Thank you, Jessica.
And just to further clarify, although I went back and looked at it, I think it's pretty straightforward. That review that would come after 9 months of operation would include a broader look at whether other types. I think it didn't just say you're going to review the 2 types that are permitted. It
Sure.
said that you'll review what should be.
Sure, I think at that point we could also probably bounce ideas and experiences off of our neighboring communities that opt in as well.
Okay, yeah, say that with the evaluation of the ordinance, blah blah blah. And so you'd give an opinion on the types and limits of marijuana facilities. So you intended that broadly?
Yes, and we can if we need to add that language, that's okay too.
I just want to make sure I understand.
Yep.
So that perhaps those 3 others would be part of that conversation in 9 months.
Sure. Yeah.
Any other comments on type and number of facilities? Or we can jump to
Through the chair.
process. Yeah.
I guess my concern is I think we need to review it a little bit more quickly than 9 months. I think if we're going to look at this with only 3 facilities, and initially I was thinking 1 facility, but I don't know if we can gauge it, and if our true concern is the patients, then we need to be able to allow them this access that's safe quickly. And in thinking about that, if we're going to only allow a few, then we need to come back and look at it rather quickly to see if it's meeting needs or not meeting needs. So I would propose a 3-month review instead. If we're going with a larger number, if they said let's open 5, then maybe 6 months. But I think the general voice from the public is that they want the access that they're allowed. So I would kind of vary that. If we're going to lessen the number of facilities opened, then a much shorter review period. But if we're going to put a larger number of facilities out there, then a little bit longer time till we have to review it.
I think 3 feels, the question of how good a job we could do in 3. And if you're telling me 3's plenty, I'm cool. 6 is fine too. My point in bringing this up last time was that we need a date so people know, and so we hold ourselves to it. I just question if we'd get the data in 3 months. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe we could, and that's great. I would rather do it sooner than later as well. But maybe 6 is a nice compromise if we're concerned about the amount of data we get in 3.
I think staff would prefer 6, just especially if there's a larger number, and then we can have a tight list of what we're reviewing, from traffic counts to any violations and things like that. I think 6 would be a happy medium, but whatever pleases the Planning Commission and Council.
Yeah, to that end, like for example, traffic violation. I'm not sure 3 would even get them through the courts to find out if that's a legitimate concern or not. Again, my sentiment's right there with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, 6 sounds about right.
Yeah. I'm seeing heads nodding about a 6-month review rather than waiting for 9. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, our city attorney makes a great point. It doesn't prohibit the CED department from keeping us advised in the meantime. It doesn't have to be in 6 months.
That's great. So looking at then site plan considerations, any discussion about, we talked about maximum square feet for retail operations, and then sort of support operations. One of the letters that we received asked us to clarify a bit further the difference between those two things. Is a reception space part of your retail operation, or is it part of your support operation? Last time we certainly heard that the 2,500, I think that was the number last time, maximum was unclear and potentially too small. So we're at a much bigger number now. The hours, the operating hours, everyone who has already come through the process, when we reviewed business plans, in my recollection at least, conformed to something very similar to this in terms of retail operating hours. So the hours didn't seem strange to me. We reviewed it at special land use hearings for the last couple of years, and they've been very similar to this. In terms of size,
just on the hours, so I haven't been part of those previous discussions as far as the hours. Is the Sunday noon to 6 p.m. True across all types of uses, or I'm just, why is one day separated out from all other days as far as uses within the city?
I think it's consistent with alcohol, correct? The hours to sell alcohol are different on Sundays.
but they don't end at 6 p.m. Yeah. So are you recommending that they be the same across all 7 days?
That would be my thought.
Through the chair, just a similar consideration. I mean, shouldn't it mimic the hours that our pharmacies are operating under? Instead of, we keep comparing it to a liquor or alcohol establishment.
But that's a great point. You're right.
I think that really varies. The smaller operations aren't open as much as the nearly 24-hour CVS, right?
True, but are they limited in any way?
Oh, by ordinance? That's my knowledge.
The pharmacies inside of those establishments aren't limited.
Or the freestanding ones. Not to my knowledge, we don't limit operating hours of pharmacies. No.
Well, good point.
So is the recommendation that the hours are the same across all days, or that we not limit it?
Yeah, if you've got reporting guidelines, what are you reporting against if you don't have some limit? I mean, if you want to make it the same as all days, I wouldn't make it 24 hours.
I'm fine with that. I think the Sunday is just a weird instance.
Commissioner Goering, does that
Yeah,
align
I
with?
was more concerned with the Sunday being separated out.
In terms of other parts of the site consideration, parking requirements, the 1 per 250 square feet of floor area for medical clinics is the same as retail. I did have a question about whether we are focusing on the overall size of the building or the retail operation space for the parking.
For other site plans, we've typically divided it up by use for like a production facility with retail use. So I think we'd apply the same here, if that makes sense to everybody else.
I think it does. Yeah. Similar to what else we've done at M1. Yep. Great. Okay.
Through the chair.
Yeah. So potentially a lower requirement if you've got warehouse in back and
Sure. Yes.
and retail front. Okay.
I was going to move on to the square footage.
Jump
So
in.
for my understanding of with the 10,000 square foot maximum, I'm fine with that recommendation. I don't understand the carving out exactly 5 and 5 as something being a necessary part of that. I think someone may want to have 2,500 square feet for their what I would say front of the house versus back of the house operations. I mean, when I'm thinking about this, I every time keep going to, what does the pharmacy look like? If I walk into CVS, is my reception part of the back of the house? No, not really. It's part of receiving the gas in the front of the house. So that's my comparative. So I'm fine with 10,000. I don't think it necessarily has to have that break at 5. I think it could be moved a little bit, but maybe some minimums, high and low.
Minimums or maximums?
Minimums or maximums. What I'm saying is that you couldn't get rid of all of your warehouse, back of the house space, and you couldn't get rid of all of your front of the house space. So you'd have to reserve, maybe we could put a limit of 1,000 on either end as either minimums or maximums, whichever way you want to place it. So a sliding scale in there, but within boundaries.
Thoughts on that?
Through the chair, if I could, based on how this is written, we've doubled what we've allowed for retail in the previous recommendation and allowed for an additional 5,000 square feet of theoretically back of house space. It seems like we've made pretty significant improvements to this as far as the size goes. I would be hesitant to allow for even more retail space on top of this, considering we've doubled that and said none of your back of house has to fall into that 2,500 square feet now. So to me that...
Or 5,000.
Sorry.
Yep.
Well, previously 2,500. So to me, this seems like a good place to start. At least it's 5,000 square feet for retail is twice the size of what we would consider small scale retail. So,
And I would add, keep in mind that I like the adjustment to 10,000. I think that was a smart move based on feedback. The original recommendations didn't come out of a vacuum. We had several work sessions with feedback from a lot of different people, a lot of different areas. But these are foundationally based off of, and I want to be somewhat respectful to that too. That we don't. There was a lot of discussion and logic about splitting the two. I do like the bigger square footage. I think that makes sense. But I would agree. Let's just leave it as it is.
I think it was small before, but I think we've accommodated for that now.
I guess I'm thinking in reality and in the real world. We're not going to have buildings that are, being built for this. We're reusing space a lot of the time. So maybe my space really fits well when I have 3,500 square feet of front of the house and 6,500 of the back of the house. What is our breakdown going to be if we're less than 10,000 total square feet? So, what I need to figure out, I guess, to be fine with this is this a strict standard? Is it a one that we can give variance to? Is it something that is a considered aspect of it, or is it you got to have 5,000 in the front and 5,000 in the back, and as we get smaller, it's always 50-50 on the breakup? That has to be, if we're going to change the ordinance to reflect that, it has to kind of have some give to it so that, people that are applying.
Yeah, the way it's set up now is it's not a 50-50. You've got the maximum on each side, and you can ask for a variance if it goes off that.
Is that
Not
correct,
to the Planning
Justin?
Commission, but to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Right.
Okay.
The Board of Zoning Appeals would review a variance for an internal use?
For variances.
They could.
Okay.
They consider variances from the strict parameters of the zoning ordinance.
Great. Other comments on
Finally,
square
something
footage?
that doesn't come here.
We'll go to Ian, and he's not here tonight. So.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. There we go. Other comments on square footage, hours? Anything else more generally on site plan considerations? Obviously, parking is called out because it's always a conversation that we have. Sounds like we are going to see these site plans, even if they are permitted uses. Anything you'd be looking for?
Through the chair, just to clarify, Justin, the 5 prior applicants were all special land use approved?
Correct.
And how many of them would be permitted as this moves forward?
They would be all permitted if they're operating under their existing special land use, but they all would have the opportunity to apply through the state and then reapply through the city's process.
And the locations where they are, if they reapplied, would be permitted then?
Correct.
They wouldn't be required to have special land use, but we would still see them?
Correct.
Thanks. Just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm writing down a question I don't want to forget to ask when we get to it. Okay. All right. Let me move down to, all right, the application process.
Through the chair.
Yep, please.
I think we skipped over the zoning district.
Did I? Oh. Thank you. Yep, so the zoning districts are unchanged from the existing. I believe that the spacing requirements are similar to existing as well in terms of the 500 feet from certain uses as well as from each other.
Yeah, so I guess my question on that one is, once again, with the office service, as it is not in the industrial type, those two districts. And the selection of that office service, is it I'm just trying to figure out why this district versus, a general commercial or something like that. So kind of wondering if this is selected because there's just a few number of parcels, or something about the use in that district as it is currently versus other districts in the city. If we're trying to, mitigate any potential negative, ramifications of an additional use. So kind of getting down to that reasoning. I know you kind of addressed it a little bit with the discussion here, but yeah.
Sure.
The driver for that decision.
Sure. A lot of that really came out of the discussions with City Council, and they had felt that those were still appropriate. But when I went back and looked just at the history of that decision making, it was because of limited parcels, like you said. At the time, there weren't as many daycares when the original ordinance was adopted, so that was kind of new. And so when I had kind of did the buffer map, I said, there's kind of a limited area where you could open one of these facilities because of the daycares that are there right now. And so we felt mostly, we mostly felt that if this is kind of an evaluation period, whether it be 6 months or 9 months, if one facility does open up in those districts, then we can really evaluate, that district. Really, the office service district has been at least in recent time kind of a, what do we do with this district? It's commercial, but they're small parcels. They're not a ton of parking. They're really close to residential, and so it seemed like maybe it's not that different than C3 potentially, because of 8 mile frontage and things like that. But it seemed like a good opportunity to test it, and then during that evaluation period, we can say, would it make sense to be part of C3 potentially or C2? But it just seemed like a small enough area that is different enough from industrial that it could be a place to evaluate it. But I could certainly see C3 being a district in the future, but I think maybe this might be an appropriate place to start.
Yeah, that's, I'm looking at the considerations of it, and you kind of touched on it. It is a district that, unlike the industrial, which has like a core piece to it, the office service is entirely an edge district, where it's always abutting another district, which, a great portion of our industrial does that as well, just based on the nature of the size. And but it does seem to be a little bit of a different case than the industrial. I would be more interested in, are there medical facilities allowed in office service that are not permitted in general commercial or C3?
I believe I'd have to double check. I don't think pharmacies are permitted like in the industrial district, but medical office, like dentists and things like that, are allowed in pretty much all the commercial type districts. And then of course from a retail perspective, if you see it as retail, that's not permitted in industrial right now, but it is permitted in office service C3, C2. I think it kind of goes back to also just with OS, we've we've had a few rezonings, especially closer to 8 Mile. We've had one rezoning to M1. We've had one to C3 there. So, I think that whole zoning district in general needs further study. What should it be? Should it be C3? Should it be its own, district that has different parameters? But I think in the OS district right now, I think there are a couple of small medical offices, and then there's a medical supply store. But that's kind of where we landed.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so for me, I'm looking at any sort of differentiation between that office service and getting more into the other commercial type uses. And if we're stepping out of the industrial into another one, is that, I understand trying to keep it a limited scale for a test case, but to me, I don't see the full justification behind that. I think either we're staying in industrial or we're stepping out into kind of a whole new range of districts. So I don't know if anybody else has a comment on that up here, but
Sure. I think probably part of the other thought was that, so for the mixed-use districts, right, MXD 1 and 2, those are very in neighborhoods, essentially. So I think we ruled that one out from the start. And then C2 does encapsulate most of Woodward. And so in the initial conversations with council, I think there was a thought that, we may not want to start on Woodward. And then there's some mixed use on 8 Mile, but there's also C3 as well. I think C3 would probably be one we may consider after this evaluation period, but I think that just depends on how these 1 or 3 go.
Any other discussion on districts? Zoning districts?
I have a quick follow-up with it. And it kind of gets back to the public safety aspect. Are there different standards for city or street infrastructure as far as lighting based on different districts, or kind of what's the driver for that kind of infrastructure in the city?
I'd probably lean on our DPW director on some of that. For Woodward and 8 Mile, those are MDOT controlled, so that's their driver, and 10 Mile is the Oakland County Road Commission. But I think a lot of it has just been historical, but that's something we can look into.
There's no additional discussion on zoning or recommended changes to zoning tonight. Justin, is that something that you can include in the review in terms of location and whether there's other districts that the city would recommend?
Sure.
So that we remember to look at that. Even if you don't recommend a change, we might want to talk about one. So.
Sure.
Okay.
I think one interesting point as well is that on Hilton Road, the M1 district does touch the west side of Hilton Road. Mm-hmm. The master plan calls for that to be mixed use in the future. There's kind of a variety of buildings there, from industrial to some that could lend themselves to more commercial and already have kind of transformed. So, that area would be an interesting test case. That if the two of the 5 that are existing medical marijuana facilities, if they pursue this process and are approved, that those could be very interesting to watch on how that it is on one of our major corridors, and if there's any negative or positive impact.
Commissioner Goring, anything additional?
No, I guess I just still have the hesitation of that stepping out into the office service. I look at it on 9 Mile where there's a stretch there where it's backing up to R1. Obviously, the industrial also is aligned with R1 south there on Wanda, so it's the same case. But it is just, yeah.
I think we just wanted to. We felt the industrial district might be too limiting to only have it there. So if we have it in the office service district, that might just provide something. Again, just something else to evaluate. But I don't think we're opposed to expanding in the future.
All right, moving on on to application process. The city has presented two potential processes. I wanted to ask a quick clarifying question. Is state approval the first step in both of these options? Or, so we had an attorney tonight talk about a preference for option 2, because if I understood correctly, it would give the applicant more assurance that if they spent a lot of money and time to get approved by the state, they had a home here in Ferndale. Where does state approval fit in each of these options? Are we making people run in our circle before they run to the state's circle, or what's the?
I believe option 1 would require state approval first, and then option 2 could be concurrent with the state's application process. So staff's concern initially was, if we receive all these applications, we could be spending a lot of resources and time in reviewing applications that may have no chance to be approved at the state level.
How interesting. So in option 1, and I didn't catch that the first time around. It came through clearly in option 1, but in option 2, at least it wasn't clear to me.
I apologize.
No, not. It's not you. That was a difference. That we might potentially be reviewing things that wouldn't ultimately be licensed at the state level. But I certainly see the two sides of the coin. If I'm a business owner, before I spend a lot of time and resources, I want to know that I've got a home. So
sure.
It's similar to the conversation about do we get site plan approval first or brownfield approval first, right?
Right.
I get it. Who wants to kick off conversations on option 1 versus option 2? I think we've heard Dan's preference in terms of option 2. Did you have anything else on that, Dan, you wanted to throw in at the moment?
No, I think I've been pretty outspoken. I like option 2 with there's some language in there already that Dan pointed out that supports those that have made a good faith effort in opening in the community. That gives them a few extra points. So that's my preference. I mean, feel free to disagree with me. I get another crack at this.
Well, the point system is something that would be new for the Planning Commission. We certainly have, levels of criteria related to, land use, public health, safety, and welfare that we go through when it comes to a special land use or a PUD. But the idea of us deciding on points, I've been on a number of grant review committees for the state of Michigan, for example, and at those committees, there can be a significant difference. So I guess one of my questions is, in this point review process, is the whole Planning Commission coming with their scoring sheet and we're hashing it out? How do we come to, do we all hand them to you and you make an average? How do we, because I could just love everybody and give everybody all the points, and Deb could be like, miser, and not give anyone any points. So what's the, points is not something the Planning Commission typically does. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think we talked about a few different ways to do that.
Okay.
I think our initial hesitation with option 2 is that I think someone referenced picking winners and losers. I think that opens you up for potentially more litigation.
Both of them were referred to as that. So
yes, that's true. Yeah. I think option 2 is more of a potential issue with litigation, but.
I think my preference would be that
arbitrary comes to mind.
you've got one staff for review. Staff could evaluate it around a consistent template. Bring us the scoring system, and then we would decide through a legislative process of motion and what have you of we validate that or we invalidate that. We really become kind of the quality control component of this. I didn't foresee us all with our sheet doing the scores. I just don't see
Hence
that.
my question. Yeah.
Through the chair, also having participated in a number of committee-based decision-making processes, that the option 2 does provide some challenges that I think, I don't know that this body wants to have the final say on, in legalities that could potentially cause trouble.
I just would add a reminder that last time we had this public hearing, there was some strong belief that this come back to the Planning Commission where staff said it didn't need to. So I just want to make sure that's out there. And this was a response to feedback from Planning Commission at the last public hearing.
And, going through something like a special land use process, which is something that is public, it's well laid out. I mean, so I guess one of my concerns is this a public process? Because trust me, when we hash this out at Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, it is public, it is on video, it is like everyone
I think it should.
can hear it.
If I could just through the chair, you remember that this is for the permitting process, which isn't
Right.
part of the zoning ordinance. So this is a separate permitting provision and does contemplate potentially applicants seeking that permit under the city ordinance while perhaps in the queue attempting to get their state issued license.
Sure.
They would not be able to open should they get the permit from the city until they have, in fact, had the state-issued license provided to them. But going back to the issue of the point system, there is again, this is good discussion. The Plan Commission was identified as the reviewing entity, but certainly could be referred to the CED, who would make a recommendation relative to the scoring to the Plan Commission for approval or not. And there's a lot of different ways that could be achieved with respect to the scoring process.
And candidly, it's no different than what happens today, other than a little more structure. We get a recommendation from the staff to approve this or not approve this after review, and we never see that criteria. No offense, I believe you.
You just back that train up. In what world do we not see all of the information and just get a recommendation from staff? Hold on.
We get the information. We're not part of the discussion. Staff comes forward with a recommendation for us, and we have our own discussion about it. I mean, I don't help put the packets together. Do you know what I mean? That there's a point I come into the discussion later.
Mm-hmm. I'm concerned about the transparency of this.
I agree with you. I want it transparent, but I think it's as transparent as to me, more so than any other process we've got.
But if we get for example,
Sure.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding it again. So if we get a site plan that comes before us, Justin and Jordan have a checklist. It's online, and you need to check off all these things before your site plan. Not special land use, not any of that. Just your site plan comes to the Planning Commission to get approved. So yes, the city staff reviews it. Probably our zoning consultants approve it. Maybe even other departments. But we see all of that. We have their reports. We know that they've gone through this very specific checklist.
Same thing. That was part of the struggle for staff, is to say, what criteria are you looking for beyond state certification, right, in that process? Shouldn't be any different. We should be very clear about what the evaluation is against and how that's rated.
Okay.
And if I may, sorry, if I may, just on from the staff perspective, one of the things I just thought it was important for you to know, just in considering this route, and if this is the pleasure of the commission, certainly, between the commission and council, CED is ready to jump if you tell us how high. One of the things we may do is we don't believe we have the bandwidth internally to review all of these and also conduct the day-to-day to do this fairly, right? I mean, we obviously want it to be transparent, fair, and consistent. So what we would do to address that, we would likely tap into our existing contractual services with Safe Built Studio, or if they don't have the bandwidth, another firm, so that you can have that sort of consistent review process. And frankly, just speaking for myself, but I would also feel safe in speaking for our staff as well, to add another layer of impartiality. I mean, there's been a lot of intense, we'll call it outreach, from interested parties on this issue. We haven't been able to take every single meeting that has been requested. In fact, we've kind of stopped taking meetings just out of fairness, and we've kind of gone to a mode of just kind of spitting out information as it's available so that no one can, have any sort of perception or reality of getting a leg up or an extra conversation with staff. So just so you know, if it goes to that route, that is likely the way we would do it. So our staff would we'd be a layer of quality control before your layer of quality control in looking and making sure that that third party went through whatever checklist was established before it came to you.
If I could, through the chair, that makes me feel far more comfortable about option 2 than anything that's been discussed this evening. I was going to recommend first of all, if staff felt comfortable doing this review on their own without a third party, because it does seem like there's some level of being partial. So I think that's a great idea to go to a third party and have them do this review, then present it to you, and then you could present it to us. So that, for me, makes me feel much more comfortable.
Through the chair. I'm favoring option one. And I think as the planning commission, adding all these components to reviewing and scaling them, I mean, I think the Michigan's application really goes through and will filter out the applicants in a way that we don't need to. And I think it's duplicative. And I think that option one is probably, it's a leaner option and it's better for the city in general. It creates an unbiased approach and it's very straightforward.
With all respect, I hear you, and again, everybody goes through it, but that's not the instruction we gave staff a month ago. And so yeah.
For clarity, though, through the chair, as staff stated, we're still going to see these because it'll be an intensification of use. It'll still come before this body, even if we are in option one. So I don't see how we're not losing then. I mean, the idea of planning commission isn't really to put discretion into the items that are before them. They're to evaluate them to see if they meet certain criteria that are set out in ordinances and are set
That's
up.
fine. I'm just trying to be respectful of staff's time and where we send them off.
I understand, but in reviewing it and looking into it deeper, I mean, I think it's the better option. It just feels more like what planning commission already does. So that's where I'm at.
Well, and something like a special land use, which is one of the things we were talking about last time, should this or should this not still be a special land use, allows for changes to a site plan, modifications and requests for those modifications from an applicant in order to meet certain criteria. This feels like I'm focused much more on a business model. Yes, there's land use stuff in here, of course, but what's the trigger here to ask for a modification to a site plan or to give feedback back to an applicant? The way that we do in a special land use. So if it's a permitted use with a lot of upfront work that's more going to qualify the business worthiness of the applicant, perhaps? I mean, that's how I read option two, is that it's more of a, like, it seems much more about the applicant than the site and the use.
But there's another component to it in recognizing the importance of people that made a good faith effort to follow our policy.
Agree.
Open, and we take that arm away in our evaluation process by not doing option two.
Well, and there's no option here that says, take all 5 plus 2. I mean,
I don't
like
want to
that's.
take all 5. Yeah.
I would absolutely raise my hand to take all 5 plus 2. But that's, that is definitely, the fact that this came back to us and still said 1 and 1 was when I said, okay, that's what I would suggest is higher than what the council and the staff have clearly been discussing at this point. So, I mean, I'd say 5 too, frankly, but.
Through the
So
chair.
we're taken off the table. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
And I am never on the higher end of this conversation, ever.
I think there's been a lot of conversation about it, and I think we've all gone through a lot of changes on it, and I think the information that we've been getting has been very great and very helpful. And it has refined this process, and we have been coming up with great ideas about moving forward. And I think I'm Chair Baker when I say I think maybe we need the higher number with option 1. And I mean, I understand that there are 5 groups that have been supportive of the community and went forward with these. They went forward with it in a business mind, though, and it was very clear from the get-go. We made it clear intentionally that there would be no bonus or no anything special about going forward with that, and they did it on their own. To now change position on that and say, oh, it did benefit you, I don't like that either as part of the criteria in option 2.
With all due respect, not all of them went in with the business mind, and there were different behaviors, I'll say, over the course of this exercise. So I am very much in favor of more than one, though, provisioning center, if that's still the will of this planning commission in their recommendation to council.
Through the chair, I think it's worth noting that nothing is stopping the existing businesses that had approval from operating under that previous permitted use. So I also agree that I don't think that should be a consideration in selection in the option 2 category. I think that it has to stand on its own merits, not based on any potential speculation or any other previous consideration on that front.
The difficulty with that, and I'm not trying to go down with the ship, I'm sorry, is that but you've got two different now business models operating in a restricted market versus an open market. And nowhere is that going to work.
Well, nothing permits that previous applicant from applying through the second, like the updated.
Correct, but they could also at risk of losing their clients.
Why?
Because if I don't take the risk of going to the state and stay with the land use, supply and demand is going to provide a cheaper product at another facility. I'm going to go.
Through the chair, I mean, I think we're diving into the actual business of medical marijuana instead of being the planning commission here and looking at things from a very objective position, if possible. There's no basis for anyone to get some sort of special treatment, which is all that option 2 when we're looking at these other facilities that applied for certain land uses, got those land uses, and had the ability to operate if they wanted to, when we were very clear to them, and as it was already stated by a member of the public, they knew that they were doing that without any special treatment consideration. To say now that we're going to give them special treatment consideration goes against everything that we did when we did allow for those uses. So I'm against that for sure.
I think I just wanted to answer one thing. I did not, I have the utmost respect for you guys. I think I am being objective and being part of that decision making back when we did that. I understand that. I'm looking at the environment today and how we get the help to the patients. That's it. I'm done. Thank you.
So Commissioner Garrick and then Commissioner Cassia.
Yeah, so that was kind of that first part of it. I just wanted to clarify that nothing is stopping it from operating under that existing. I do think, though, that option 2 is the better route to go as far as a process, because option 2 with that modified to not include any sort of consideration for those previous approvals having any differentiation in their scoring. I do think that the option 2, though, is something that is outside of a lot of these issues are outside of the purview of the Planning Commission when we're talking about business plans and that sort of thing. So I would support the review and scoring by some third party, whether it's either city staff or third party, however the city wants to go through that process. And if that gets reviewed here for those things that are pertinent to the typical site plan review and that sort of thing, I think that makes sense. But for us to be making decisions on some of those other categories doesn't make much sense to me. And I would also agree with 1 is too few and maybe 3 isn't a place to start. It does allow for there to be potential competition within the city of Ferndale. I know markets are different than city boundaries, but it also, we don't have all the eggs in one basket. Let's say, as far as one business can be very different from its separate business. So I think that allows for that. And then the third portion on the process, I want to still state that whether it's state first or local first, there's still, it's not guaranteed that you'll get the approval through the other one. So if they come through us first, get the approval as one of, whether it's 1 or 3, they still have to go through the state process. And that might not make it through. And I think it gets rid of the arbitrary portion of the way we had option 1, where it was just based on whoever gets it first from the state rushes down here. So that's why I think option 2 kind of clarifies that, which is good, but it does not really solve the issue of still needing 2 approvals, 2 different locations, and the nature of that timing-wise. I don't know what to say other than if we have 3, that does address the issue of if we only have 1 and they struggle to get their permit or approval through the state, there's other ones that it could also open. I don't think it solves that process as far as which one goes first, and guarantee that it would open, but it does address the arbitrary timing aspect of it.
I wanted to agree with Councilman Martin as far as I believe that the facilities that have been, the caregivers who have been given some amount of, the caregivers who have opened already and have gone through that good faith effort to open and provide care for their patients, to me, it makes sense for them to receive some sort of foot in the door as far as this scoring process goes, but that shouldn't be whole cloth for all 5 that were previously permitted. That being said, I think option 2 might also allow us to, if we believe that there were a lot of speculative special land uses that were given out before, or facilities that were opening before, this possibly allows us to forego any speculative business opening or perhaps a recreational marijuana facility in the future. I don't know if we're thinking about that as we're thinking about these medical marijuana facilities, but in the future at some point recreational facilities may open, and I believe it's in the near future, so maybe we should continue to try and find someone who will again open as a medical facility for patients and not as a speculative business for future development. So I would say that option 2 seems to be the better option for that reason.
Options 1 or 2?
Just a question on that through the chair of why that would be a less speculative process. I think if you could help understand that point.
It just, to me, appears that these businesses will now be vetted out much more clearly than they would be, or they would be vetted out better than they would be if they just went to the state, if they were being reviewed in-house and by a third party.
And if I may, the scoring system wouldn't give ultimate rule to those first 5. We're saying those that actually physically opened and made a good faith effort to see patients may get an advantage in the point system. Not a deciding of all things, but a recognition of the fact that they went ahead and pursued our policy goals. It's not a litmus test. It's just what you do with the score.
We have an operational question. In option 2, a number of these requirements, I'm trying to picture how these applications would be reviewed, and a number of these are reasonably site specific. So, how would you? Are you expecting applications to be tied to a specific site? Are you expecting people to identify a potential site? How would we know whether the provisioning center or safety compliance facility will be consistent with land use for the surrounding neighborhood if they're not here yet?
I think what we had spoke about was that it would be tied to a specific location, so someone would have a real property interest in a location. That would rule out some of the speculation that could be happening now. Instead of spinning staff's wheels or a third-party reviewer, if there's a tie to a specific property and location, I think that should be required. I believe that's how we wrote it.
Through the chair, the application would be site-specific and would have to identify the proposed location.
So option 2 presupposes that you have site control, whether you own it or you rent it. You have control over an address you're putting on your application.
Yes, and again, that's for the application for the permit. So yes, it does require that.
Through the chair. How does I guess it's for the city? How does putting the city first for application process, or putting the state first for application process, effectively remove this race situation that we're talking about, and races and getting somewhere first. So either I'm going to be racing here to get my application in first, or to the state. I don't understand how option 2 like alleviates that issue. I understand what we're saying when once you get state approval, you're going to have a lot of people trying to come here and get in front of us and get this approval. Option 2, they're still doing that. It's just following or a new process and an additional process. So does it alleviate that, or how does it in your opinion?
I don't think it does. I think option 2 is more of a race, really. Option 1, the race that has been talked about by at both public hearings, I think, is related to the scenario in which the state would approve, 5 facilities in Ferndale on the same day, and we have people camping out and waiting for the call from the Capitol, and they're running up here to the front door, which I think is less likely than the race that would happen with option 2.
Point of clarification through the chair is, I think that what it solves is the arbitrary nature of if approval, it went through the state process, and one case is managed by one individual, another one's handled by somebody else. Let's say A is submitted first, B is submitted later, but B gets approved first, and then they are the ones that are first in line to the city. I think the option 2 with the 30-day enrollment period, it's, you have an open window that says you accept anything that comes in during that period of time, and it's not just based on who happens to get through first, whether they literally are the ones that submitted first or if they had been approved first just by something outside of their control. So to me, I think that's the difference as far as that aspect.
Through the chair, in option 2, would the city limit the number of applicants in that 30-day window?
No.
Okay.
So the race isn't against the clock. There's a period for submittal. Should the vetting process of option 2 proceed and there's no candidates, there's not the number, then after that period, if the number that is authorized is unfulfilled, then it would be on a as submitted basis. But during that enrollment period, it's based on the recommendation or the scoring that's proposed in 2, rather than the race.
So are you then stamping, dating, and putting in line? I mean, so there was a question about, what happens if one of the approved businesses closed, if someone loses a license at the state level, sort of who's next in line? Is the idea that the city is kind of maintaining a list of some sort?
So that's my fear too, and just maybe this will clear it up.
I'm not sure if I understand that question. Maybe.
So if we approve 5 at the city level, and all 5 are waiting for state approval, and 2 get approved, and then we have 6, 7, 8, and 9 in that 30-day window who have state approval but don't have city approval, how are we effectively choosing at that point? I mean, the idea is to get pharmacies on the market to sell to patients, okay? So if I go and get state approval, I know I've got state approval. This is why I'm for getting state approval first. Then I come to the city, and then the city can approve me in a way I can go. Now, if I get approval here and lose at the state,
under the proposed text, whatever the ultimate body is that is going to be issuing the permits would only be issuing permits for the number that is authorized. So to the extent that it's 5 provisioning centers, you would score those within the 30-day period and issue not more than 5 permits. And those permittees would then be endeavoring to secure state-issued licenses and would not be able to operate in the city until they had achieved and obtained such license. And if they had not, and then their permit was, and they were rejected at the state, then there would be an opportunity for the number of permits to be issued to go up by that respective amount.
And who's next in line was my question.
Yeah, through the chair, I think the understanding there is you have a 30-day period where you get all the applications. That closes. Then they're evaluated and scored. And the top scores are the ones that get the permits. So you will have a ranking of all applicants that are applied during that window.
That's right.
If the first 5 go through, 1 drops out, you go to number 6, and so on. I think that's the process.
So do we open this annually, like healthcare enrollment? Like,
Well,
how do you
my
ever get
understanding
more-
is
how do you ever get more in the
after 6
system?
months or whatever the period of time is and you increase the number, then you could.
Increase the number, someone goes out of business, any number of things could happen that you would need to bring someone up from the list. How do you ever get new applicants into the list?
Well, there is contemplated, if that number isn't met, then it is on a as-applied basis.
That's a very legitimate point in both options.
So the only fear I have is, what if I don't get, I already have my state approval right now, and I don't get picked in those first 5. I could be opening and ready to give to the public here, but I can't because I wasn't part of the first 5. I lost in that race, just as the other fear. And that's, I mean, the idea is, let's get something open. I think that the less prohibitive fashion is go to the state, get the license, and then come here when you're ready and we know you can open. Because I agree with staff, which I think is the concern, is we process 5 applications, 3 drop off. We go back, 30-day window, open it again. We go through 30 applications, we get our top 5, 2 maybe. You know, I mean, it's a lot of built-in work that I don't think we want to put. I think that's why I think option 1. I get that there's a little bit of this discretion, and we get to look at applicants more. It looks like in 2, but I think we'll still get to look at them just as much in 1 when they come here for approval. So that's my fear. Is the idea is getting these places open so that people can safely get their medicine. We need the least obstructive means of doing that. So.
Through the chair, after hearing the discussion, I tend toward option 1. I think good cases and a lot of work have gone into this, but I think for a lot of those reasons, that's the one that stands out to me, to one that I'd be likely to support.
Through the chair, question for the city attorney. For the planning commission's role, the options, that is part of the regulatory ordinance, correct? So the planning commission could make a recommendation, but it's not they aren't voting specifically on that tonight, correct?
That's correct.
That's an excellent point.
Okay. I'm just thinking of motions and how they might change. And
Yeah, all the motions are recommendations.
They are, but they're all in text amendments to the zoning ordinance. Yeah, not the
Not the
procedure.
permitting, except for the permitting. That is not in the zoning ordinance.
And we don't have a motion on it. Right. I think.
Commercial office tax motions, industrial district tax motions. I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, I think this town body should still make a recommendation on it.
We briefly discussed the next item. I'm just going to move forward a little bit. We can come back if we need. About the recommendation that this is now a permitted use, and we've heard from the city that even though it's a permitted use, it would be staff's intent to still bring these site plans to the planning commission. Any additional comments or discussions on permitted use, which is a change, currently special land use? We talked about it right at the beginning, but in terms of the fact that the recommendation is that this become a permitted use, and that city staff has already said that they would intend to bring us site plans for anything rather than just approving administratively, even though it's not a special land use. Okay. So I don't see anyone clamoring to say this needs to stay a special land use.
I'm sorry, which one?
Just wanted to reconfirm that the commission was comfortable with this moving into the realm of a permitted use rather than a special land use.
Thank you.
And we've talked about evaluation in terms of what it sounds like is that the commission is leaning toward a 6-month review rather than 9, and that we would like that review to include a conversation about zoning districts and locations, as well as types and limits of marijuana facilities. Anything else you would want to see in 6 months, so we'll know, should we have all 5? What are thoughts on that? What are the feeling from the communities? The recommendation on, should these be in commercial districts? That type of thing would come back for a conversation as part of that in 6 months. Anything else you would want in that?
I think just asking, because I think things are going to come up, we can't foresee, just asking for a comprehensive review in 6 months.
Or maybe we agree, we always have, space on the agenda for administrative items, and we used to have space on the agenda for commission items. But if there's something that comes up, perhaps we've heard something that's happened in another city, or we have a question about how something is going, that we bring it to the table just so that Justin and Jordan have as complete a picture as possible for when they start this review. Make sense? Great. So last, you know what, shoot. Justin, I meant to ask about, so we talked a bit about what happens if a business opens and then closes or loses their license. That is really tied to this discussion around option 1 or option 2. There was a question about disposal, and so in some language about how things are stored and disposed of that might be hanging around from the old ordinance. But I think it was Richard that mentioned it, that there are strict state provisions around disposal, and that perhaps we just update our language to align with that. Thoughts?
We can review that, yes.
Okay.
I don't think we focused on that during this most recent. We did kind of set it up as
It
was
certainly
previous.
predates the
It does.
state rules, and
Sure.
there is issues that are embodied within the existing text that have been now addressed by the state.
So the state rules may even be more strict now than when we originally drafted this. There was also a question about a C of O requirement.
I think that's a valid point.
Yeah.
Through the chair,
Mhm.
that I believe was as it relates to option 1, though.
Okay.
And again, depending on how this body rules, may
Right.
not be.
Order of operations question.
But the concept, I don't think, was included in the option 2. It is in option 2 as well. So I think that's a valid point.
Okay.
Because option 2 does contemplate the period of time where they would, well, the point I think was why have somebody undertake intensive expenditures to get C of O where there may not be certainty or high level certainty regarding a licensee. And I think that could be modified to come back later at a later point and not be part of the application process on the front end.
Yeah, in terms of having a C of O, would we be comfortable with that being modified to you needing to have site control, or back it up even one more step that you have the option to have site control? Because if we are, again, depending on option 1 or option 2, you're asking for a really significant investment up front for someone who may not know whether or not they're getting approval. So in option 2, do we want you to have site control and or a C of O before you get ranked? I think that was the nature of the question.
I think the C of O issue was the issue raised, not site control. I think having site control, you're certainly going to need for the state license as well.
Got it. So not just an option.
And so
You need site
the
control.
recommendation is that there is site control.
Okay. Thank you. That will help with some of the race to the door as well. So the last point here, again, goes back to the number of facilities, but it also talks about the existing facilities, how they're, currently allowed to operate and would continue to, they do have approval, to operate in a certain manner that is more restrictive than what the new law is. I don't know if we need to have any additional discussion on, this was more of a explanatory or statement of that. So Justin, just to make sure that we're clear, we've got a number of motions related to text amendments in the zoning ordinance that are written out here.
With respect
we
to
don't
the
have
chair,
a
that's
motion.
Right, that's what we're working through right here to see what motion covers which component of the discussion.
We don't have a motion specifically on the option 1 versus option 2.
Correct.
But would it be useful to staff and to Councilman Martin to have, if one can be reached, a recommendation from this body to take to City Council? Even though it's not technically in the zoning ordinance?
Yeah, if I may, through the chair, actually the first motion, the potential medical marijuana text amendment motion, does cover the number of facilities. So if it's the will of this body to amend the number of approved, we can do it there as one of the findings.
Thank you. That's all.
We would need a separate motion to designate option 2, correct, if we wanted to go to option 2. If there's no stomach to do that, then we probably don't have to do anything, right? Because option 1's already in the, or do we have to say option 1 or 2?
Again, that's the permitting. You have
Right.
to, I think it would be helpful for council, for
So,
this
yeah.
body to make a recommendation as it relates to which one that it believes is important. But again, it's not an amendment of the zoning ordinance. It doesn't require.
So you need a permitting recommendation. Right. Okay.
Which would be something we'd craft at the table. That's not baked into any of these.
Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of the hours of operation, where does that fall? If we wanted to make sure that hours of operation were consistent across all days?
I believe that's the
Is
first
that
one as
still in
well.
the first one?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's actually embodied in both, but it's in section 165 as well.
There. Okay. Other than the conversation about option 1 and option 2,
Did we want to dictate
Is
a
the-
6-month review? I'm sorry.
that was actually the recommendation about a review time isn't in the ordinance. It's something you just want direction from.
It's in section
Here.
165.
It is in section 165.
So we'd add it as another finding. Finding D.
Do I feel like you're making this motion helpful?
No. Yeah, I don't care. I would move the Planning Commission recommend approval of the amendment to Article 8, Use Regulation, Section 24-165, Medical Marijuana Facilities to City Council as summarized below from the following items. Additional to Finding A, Finding B, that the number of provisioning facilities be increased to 3. Item C, that the hours of operation are not dictated. Is that what we're saying?
It's consistent across all
Is the same consistent across the board, Monday through Sunday. And D, that there is a 6-month review period to evaluate the effectiveness of the changes.
Is there a second to that motion?
A second.
Thank you. That was a motion by Councilman Martin, and that was a second by Commissioner Azar. Discussion on the motion. Councilman Martin, just to clarify, the increase to 3 provisioning facilities then still contemplates 1 of the other facilities?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you for the clarification.
You had mentioned it earlier. I did make notes.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Should we specify in the finding, the hours finding that it's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m.?
If you'd like, sure.
Do you accept that
Yes.
amendment, Commissioner Azar? Thank you. So we will standardize the hours across all days, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. discussion on the motion? All right, no one's looking at me. Ready to vote when you are, Barb.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Gorank,
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Farr,
Yes.
Casio,
Yes.
Azar,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes, with explanation.
okay, and Baker.
Yes. Commissioner Martin? Councilman?
Whichever, it doesn't matter. I really appreciate everybody's discussion around this. I don't know that I'm 100% sold on this, but I support our deliberations as a body, and I'm very interested in moving this on to council. So,
Thank you. We've got a couple of additional motions here as well, and you do need all of them made this evening,
yep,
correct?
I move the Planning Commission recommend approval of the amendments to Article 19 definition, Section 24-445, 24-459, 24-469 to the City Council as summarized by the findings below.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. That was a motion by Councilman Martin and a second by Commissioner Azar. Is there discussion on that motion? Before we move on, I just have a clarifying question. I want to make sure the conversation about the C of O should come in our recommendation about option 1 versus option 2. Thank you very much. Let me put my note in the right place. Okay. All right. We'll have a vote when you're ready.
Okay. Commissioners Brazen,
Yes.
Farr,
Yes.
Casio,
Yes.
Gorank,
Yes.
Azar,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Baker.
Yes, thank you. That motion passes. 2 more to go. 3.
Let me keep going. I don't want to hog the motions.
Roll with it, sir.
All right, motion. I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the amendment to Article 4, Commercial and Office Districts to City Council as summarized below in the findings.
Is there a second to that motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Again, that motion was made by Councilman Martin with a second by Commissioner Azar. And we'll call a vote from the clerk.
Sir, chance for discussion.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you. Discussion on the motion.
Yeah, through the chair, I was wondering if there is any value or, in doing this one for office service as a special land use first permitted, or if that doesn't make any sense to separate that out from the industrial districts.
For the reason of just the proximity to single family?
Yeah, I guess it's the difference in the actual use of the district as well as the geographic distribution of the way it's aligned.
Given the limited size of that district, I don't feel strongly about it being a special land use. Would anyone else want to office service a special land
I mean, it really is next to industrial districts in almost every case.
Residential, I mean.
No, I mean, it
industrial.
actually is next to the industrial, so it's almost, it is almost the same, but it is a little bit different.
It is.
To me, personally, looking at the zoning map earlier, I just don't see a reason why we might just, at first blush, why we might grant it in one area of the office and service district and not another. So I would be inclined to make it a permitted use as well.
And the thought there is I got to pull up the map again, but a portion of the office service that's within M1 in the south, where other locations are next to M2 and others that are there's one in the southeast that is just adjacent to residential. So I guess there's those 3 unique parts of the district, but it's not a make or break thing for me, but just wanted to make sure we had the discussion.
Any additional discussion on the motion?
Just for a moment, we're pulling up the map.
Sure.
Just if we
Yep,
could have-
take your time. No additional discussion? Okay. All right, I don't hear any additional discussion on the motion. No amendments at this time? And we'll take a roll call vote.
Commissioners Farr,
Yes.
Casio,
Yes.
Garrick,
Yes.
Azar,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Baker.
Yes, that motion passes.
And lastly, I'll move the Planning Commission recommend approval of, not lastly, I'm sorry, there's one after this. Motion that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the amendment to Article 6, Industrial Districts to City Council as summarized below in the findings.
Is there support?
Second.
Thank you. That was a motion by Councilman Martin with a second by Commissioner Goering. Discussion on motion? All right, then a roll call vote from the clerk.
Casio,
Yes.
Garrick,
Yes.
Azar,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Farr,
Yes.
Baker.
Yes, that motion passes. Thank you.
And then before I make the last motion, I'm seeking clarification, the will of this body. Is it to recommend option 1 or option 2?
I don't know that you have consensus from this body.
I don't know that I do either.
So I think you could make a motion and we could discuss.
I'd rather make a motion that will pass and vote against it if I don't like it.
I understand. My politician friend. I understand.
All right, for discussion purposes, I will move that we adopt option 1 as a permitting recommendation to City Council for consideration.
With the elimination of the C of O
With
requirement?
the elimination of the COD requirement.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. So that was a recommendation that the Code of Ordinances reflect a process related to option 1 without the C of O requirement. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, that motion was made by Councilman Martin with a second by Commissioner Farr, yes?
Yes.
Thank you. And discussion on that motion. This was certainly the most discussed item this evening. I'm not passing judgment. It's important.
No, it is important.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if it got refined further, before it ultimately came to council. We are not an approving body for
I think
this.
it's important for some topic to go to the approving body for this. So whether it's what I agree with or not, I'd like something to go.
Some direction. Okay. Do we want to take a straw poll? Do we want to discuss?
If I could, through the chair, while I do think that with the addition of 2 more provisioning centers, per our recommendation, makes option 1 more palatable, because it's not a race for one spot. I still think that it can be seen as a race to get one of these positions, and I would like to go with option 2, but if it's the will of the Planning Commission, then I certainly will support going with option 1.
And this will ultimately be the will of council.
Of course,
So
if it's what we want to recommend.
Through the chair. I'm for option 1, and the reason is that the fears that I think we expressed that kind of resulted in us getting option 2 may not have been clear when the last time we met, and I think option 1 still allows us to review these plans and allows the city to look at these plans and make sure all the boxes are checked, and the state's going to be reviewing these such that we will still get the best applicants. I think this is a situation where there's a race no matter what, and I think by creating more obstacles. We're not helping the public as much by getting these things in place as fast. So that's why I'm in sort of support of one.
I have a clarifying question for the city attorney, and you may or may not know this. When an application or an applicant heads to the state, is the state license tied to a site, or is it tied
Yes.
to an applicant? So we're
Tied to a site.
essentially saying, get site control, go to the state and get your permit, and then come back here and get in line. So if you've
Well, no,
if
under
you
option
put in
one,
your-
not get in line, then you would be issued a permit,
Well, there's
assuming
three.
Up to the number.
Yeah, right. So if they're number 4 and we permit 3, do they need to go back through the process to try to get a license for another community?
Well, they would not be able to operate in this community. I don't want to give recommendations as to what they may or may not do.
I mean, at the state level. So would that state license be
But
transferable
the
to
state's
another
not going to issue, the state wouldn't issue for if the ultimate decision is to allow 3, because the state will have the zoning ordinance that has the maximum and wouldn't issue more than the number that's authorized in the zoning ordinance.
I see. Okay. So right now the state hasn't issued any for Ferndale because it's not
That's true,
authorized.
that's correct.
Okay. Oh, okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Option 1 is my preference.
I'm sorry, you said option 1 was?
Yeah, this has been a really great discussion. But I think ultimately, again, just transparency and the fact that the 2 notes that I made 2 days ago on this were duplicative and outside of the area of expertise of the Planning Commission when it came to option 2. So I guess that would be the words I'd want to pass on to the City Council for consideration for a Code of Ordinances update. Any other discussion on the motion?
Yeah, through the chair.
Oh, God, I skipped over you. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Where in the state statute are you seeing that limitation based on ordinance? My understanding was you could still get state approval, but you'd still have to get permitted through the city, that it wasn't restricted in your application.
To a certain location?
Yeah, your location potentially, you could get your state approval, and that's what I was just looking for. I
Like
thought
the
it was
total number for the city approved by the state.
right. If we look to Rule 5, 2, or is it? Where is it?
Are you looking at the emergency rules?
I think so. I thought it was H under Rule 8, 2H. It just talks about a proposed facility is in a location that contains multiple tenants and any applicable occupancy restrictions. I thought it was falling somewhere in there, but I just didn't see it, where that restriction lies with the state application. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot. It's not a
Yeah,
test.
I mean, it could just be information to be gathered before the council meeting.
That's not important to my decision.
I don't know the exact location, but I believe it's in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, before the council meeting, that may be important information for this discussion of option 1 versus option 2.
Well, there is and you're aware of the pre-licensure checklist too, which is site-specific.
Hi.
Hello. If I may, sorry. Just for context for discussion, Justin Danaskis, 169 West Clarkson Road. We actually worked on the state bills, and just for clarification, you might want to talk in the context of pre-qualification versus qualification with the state. The state's not going to fully permit anyone unless they have local permitting approval first. The state is not going to pick the winners and losers. You say, we only want 3. They say they're not getting past us until they have that local approval first. Pre-qualification, and if you're just looking at, hey, go to the state, get vetted, and so forth, well, now there's going to be 12 applicants up in front of the licensing board tomorrow. So someone that gets permitted in Ann Arbor, there's a gentleman up for that, then he can just run over here because he's the only one in the state for a while to then come get it. And no one will ever get fully approved for Ferndale, they can only get pre-qualified, and once you're pre-qualified, you still have to add your phase 2 specifically. So just a little context, hopefully that helps with your discussions.
So your pre-qualification is not site-specific?
Correct. They don't look at anything specific. There's nothing related to a site on that.
Through the chair, Laura has told me that they, when I've spoken to their representatives, that there's either option that can proceed. And while there's some that wait, there's other, they've indicated that they'll process the application for a state license consistent with the local zoning ordinance. But again, I'm not sure.
I mean, in terms of our discussion tonight, it sounds like the Planning Commission can work through, you know, most any process that the city, you know, says is legal and, you know, complies with the order of operations at the state level. I think we're being as thoughtful as possible with the information that we have. But there's got to be 10 attorneys in the room who are, you know, certainly well more informed than me. So, I mean, obviously what we're doing, whatever motion we'd make isn't binding, and, you know, Dan, there may be more information to gather before
No, I understand.
you take I imagine you'll be taking some explanation or something to the council at the meeting. So.
Yep.
Okay. Additional discussion on this motion. This motion was to recommend that the Code of Ordinances reflect option 1 without the C of O requirement as a preferred option from Planning Commission discussion. Are we ready for a vote, or is there additional discussion?
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, it's a unique case because, you know, it's a new use, but also limited number allowed. So it's kind of a unique situation, and that's where we're coming into the whole timing issue. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable recommending either option, especially as option 2 is written. Yeah. There would be a significant rewrite of that, and with option 1, I think there's some problems inherent there. I guess we don't have a clear answer of whether the state would issue the actual license or not. I guess there's some discussion on that, but if they did, and they hadn't come to the city to go through the process, now, okay, we have 3 applicants. They may or may not be permitted through the state first, but if they are, you know, the 500-foot radius, for instance,
Correct.
These could be 2 neighboring parcels.
Correct.
So we don't really have an answer to how that process would be worked out.
Yeah.
I think the idea of a pre-qualification and those being vetted and going through the city after that, you know, it alleviates some of that, but it's a kind of messy no matter which way we're looking at this option. So I don't feel comfortable recommending any options that we have as stated here. Obviously, it's the permitting process, so it's outside of the scope of the Planning Commission. So,
through the chair, I think I feel the same way. I think maybe we are not like the body that knows it all, like the most informed. It's the subject matter experts.
Well, we certainly have the option of not taking action on the motion.
Council that's on its own. Yeah, you don't have to worry about it. Just provide your sign.
I think. Do I have the option of not taking action on the motion?
You can table.
Looking at the clerk. Okay.
No, if I may, through the chair, I don't want to table anything. I need the discussion. I don't need. I would like this. We've got a significant amount of time invested in this. If the answer is to push it to council, then the answer is to push it to council. I don't want to come back in a month and try to come up with another recommendation.
Oh, I
if
see
we
what
as
you're
a body can, I don't want to stall this process with another month of planning commission. No offense.
That wasn't my intent. Was to have anything come back. My intent was if we don't make a recommendation, we don't make a recommendation.
So I'll make a recommendation.
In that case, rather than there being any confusion and tabling something, do we? I mean,
I will withdraw the motion.
I'm looking at the clerk. Do we withdraw a motion or do we? Okay. Perfect. I don't want to send the wrong message by us voting something down. Okay.
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 Thank you.
Does the seconder need to withdraw or just the?
seconder really doesn't even count.
Sorry.
I know.
Sorry, Josh.
I know, it's
Seconder doesn't
harsh.
really count. Jeez.
It's all right.
Don't tell an attorney he doesn't count.
Yeah,
Oh,
once he's
jeez.
withdrawn, it's.
That's why I am an attorney, because I don't count. Don't count math.
All right, so those were all of the motions in front of us. We dealt with the issues related to the zoning ordinance. We did not make a specific recommendation on the item related to the regulatory code. Justin and Dan, is there anything on this topic that we've, sort of left unanswered? Did we miss any motions?
I don't think for this evening.
Okay. There's obviously a big open question about the process.
Sure.
But it is outside our purview.
But I think the conversation was very helpful, and I think you were all battling with a lot of the things that staff was. So
Certainly.
I think it was a worthwhile discussion, and I think it'll point us in a direction for council. So
Okay. Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
guys have been working on it for at least a year now. Thank you, City Attorney.
Welcome.
Thanks for joining us.
Madam Chair, may I suggest a 5-minute?
Absolutely. I was just about to say, we've got some
Thanks for
folks who I know are going to be headed out.
I'm gonna make a
So
sign
we
that says,
will
we're paying this guy by the
take a 5-minute adjournment. We'll be back at 9:06.
Well, there is a commission that's called the Ferndale Community.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
I'm like, this doesn't seem like
That's
their
not
product.
quite what that group's doing.
That's what Michael did.
I was like, I didn't
Yeah,
think that
didn't
they were.
expect that when I opened the first page. Chasing a new,
It's coming up.
I know.
chasing a new
It will be
revenue source.
spring one day. All right, so let's come back to order. It is 9:09, and we have one additional public hearing this evening. We've got one additional public hearing this evening, and then I've got a request from an audience member for an update on an existing project, so I'll bring that up under administrative items. But our final public hearing is on residential ordinance amendments regarding porches, pools, projections, and fences, and amendments to the ordinance around those items. As we did with our earlier public hearing, we will take, we will have an introduction from our city staff. And then if someone would like to speak to this public hearing item, you can come up to the podium. You've got 3 minutes to state your name and your address and offer any comment that you would like.
have a good one, Joseph.
That we will start with an introduction from our city staff on residential ordinance amendments.
Great. Hello again.
Hello.
So when I first wrote this staff report, I didn't think we'd have this many motions, but we covered a lot of ground. So there are 4 motions here that have multiple layers for consolidation purposes. A lot of this conversation started February 7th. We had a brief discussion item just about a number of topics that all sort of relate to residential development and residential housing, and we have a new building official who works through SafeBuilt or is contracted through SafeBuilt, and he started in September, and so it's always good to have an outside source, coming from a different city looking at ordinances, and he had saw some areas that have confusion, because he's dealing primarily with the single-family homes that come in for additions and new builds and things like that. So eliminating confusion. Also, the BZA had seen a few instances over the past couple of years of maybe some ordinances that are preventing additions we may want. And then throughout the master plan process, we talked a lot about, we want to encourage people to preserve their homes and continue to live in homes. And we know the, price of housing is going up everywhere, not just Ferndale. But if we can encourage people to some flexibility in, doing some of these home additions, that might get them to be able to stick around and be longtime residents. So I'll go through each of these. I did not receive any letters, emails, phone calls about any of these for the public hearing notice, but a lot of this came from conversations with the building official, BZA, and then applicants that we frankly had told, if you were to go to the BZA, it's going to be pretty hard to show a hardship, but we're working on some things. So, projections in front yards, initially that was looked at just really to clean up. There's a separate line that calls out bay windows, chimneys, and eaves, and it's different than the architectural feature allowances that are in a table. And so we would recommend consolidating and then also allowing the addition of window wells to that chart, because those are not explicitly mentioned, but they're proposed quite often in the city, and so it's a little bit unclear. Much of the conversation really, I think internally we've been talking quite a bit about front porches. Right now, I mean, I think as a city as a whole, we like to encourage front porches that, kind of encourages interaction with neighbors, things like that, throughout our residential districts. And so right now, front porches are counted in lot coverage. So that can, in some of our limited lot sizes, prevent people from doing that. So staff recommends moving forward with removing front porches from lot coverage to allow for, more front porches on the smaller lots where, that may prevent a front porch from being added because they'd be over lot coverage. Front porches also came up when we were looking at front setbacks. So we know that the requirement for in R1 districts is 25 feet for a front setback. We also know that that's pretty much never going to happen because there is a footnote A in the section that requires designers and architects to look at blocks where everything's been previously built, which is pretty much everywhere in the city. And using the average depth of the front yards of the 5 adjacent lots in the zoning district, in either zoning district, plus or minus 3 feet, and then eliminating the greatest and least distances. I'm glad our building official looks at that more than I do, because that is confusing and complicated. But so we would recommend that in that area, we would replace porch or deck with attached garage or enclosed front porch. So instead of penalizing people for having any type of deck, a front porch that is open air isn't really habitable space. So changing that language, doesn't really penalize people that want to have front porches. But if you do enclose it, that is like an extra room, and that should probably count for the setback. Not necessarily a penalty, but just in keeping with the rest of the district.
Counted mine, so that's fine with me.
And then connected to that, so projections into required yards, that same chart with the bay windows and architectural features would also be proposed to be amended to allow for a maximum of 5 feet in the front yard. So we don't necessarily want people right on the sidewalk because we know that there's probably visibility issues with people backing up. But we as staff had just thought 5 feet maybe was the maximum for that, but that's certainly open for discussion, as all of this is. We also have run into some issues where single-family homes have been submitted, their plans have been submitted, where it's kind of confusing. In the R1, section 2443, that chart, it lists impervious surface in the schedule regulations, and it's just dashes. So people assume that they don't need to provide any open space, which, we always correct them, but it has led to some frustrating phone calls from there. So we're recommending that the chart be updated to just say open space there, so it's in one section, so it's not listed elsewhere. So we would recommend that change, as well as ensuring that a footnote also includes single-family dwellings. In that footnote, because we did allow single-family dwellings to be in R3 districts, and so that's not 100% clear, but this would kind of clarify that. Regarding fences, we talked a lot about this, I think, in February, but fences, they're not permitted to extend toward the street beyond the front building setback. We don't want to change that, but those fences are limited to 4 feet. We've had numerous conversations with residents on that 6 feet is more appropriate because of protecting children in the backyard, pets, things like that. I think my dog could probably leap over 4 feet, but she's kind of a super dog. But so we recommend increasing that maximum fence height with 6 feet. I think at the conversation last meeting had talked about, what about corner lots? And so the way that the corner lot line ordinance is written in the definitions essentially delineates the front yard from the side yard with a line, a lot line that it also has to do with the address, if you're on Albany Street on the corner of Allen, if your address is Allen, then that would be your front yard. That's probably a bad example thinking of what Allen looks like, but it's where your address is what is considered in that perspective. Continuing on in the additions and residential homes theme, residential dwellings have the 5-foot side yard setback. We recently updated this for accessory buildings, structures and uses. There's been a lot of requests for expansions that are, maybe closer than the 5-foot setback, but the building code does allow for 3 feet with fire-rated construction, and so staff's proposing allowing second floor additions only on existing footprints. That could be this 3-foot setback and would not be closer than the property line of the existing home. So this would allow the addition, but you couldn't just add on to the lower level to meet this, 3-foot, to have this 3-foot benefit. And then lastly, swimming pools. This was kind of an interesting one, and I don't really, I think someone asked what's the accurate number of pools in the city. I don't have that, unfortunately, but I do know that if, considering the lot widths in the city.
How do you not have that? Justin. Shocking.
VSNA, it's helpful in many reasons, but I don't think the historical information is that great. I can say that there's 4 permits for swimming pools in the queue right now, but they would have trouble meeting the existing ordinance right now, which requires 25 feet from another accessory structure. So we're simply just, we don't think that was the intent of the ordinance to limit swimming pools, but we are proposing that pools be exempt from that 20-foot requirement, but pools should be no less than 3 feet from the other accessory building, so there's still some gap there.
So can I have my second story addition 5 feet from the neighbor's house over the pool?
Yes,
Your RV next
As long as it's not 25 feet from the shed.
My question is whether a pool is impermeable surface.
Yeah, that's
Actually.
that's the question I had.
Yeah.
That's a good question, and
Brett and I had the same question.
And I can look at that while we're continuing. I believe that counts as lot coverage.
It should.
Yeah. So
Yeah, okay.
I believe that it is.
All right.
Unless it's a natural pond pool.
Right.
Inflatable.
A sustainability feature
Of
maybe?
sorts,
right?
but-
Bioswale. This is what happens to us after 9 p.m.
Right.
Thank you, Justin.
No problem.
I don't want to get too carried away. We do need to open a public hearing. Was there anything else in terms of introduction? Sorry, we got.
I don't think so.
Alrighty, then I will open the public hearing at 9:20 p.m. Gavel. Yeah. If we have anyone here to speak to the proposed text amendments to fences, pools, residential setbacks, the items that Justin introduced, you're welcome to come to the podium, state your name and address for the record. You've got 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission on any of these residential district amendments that are proposed. Welcome back.
Hi. Could you just repeat the fence proposal again? Or
Sure. So fences right now, if you were to build one along the front of your house, that front fence would have to be 4 feet tall.
Okay.
Where everywhere else it could be up to 6 feet. As a residential fence, only residential, not commercial. And so now we're proposing that you could have 6 feet instead of 4 feet.
Okay. Yep. That's fine. And then just speaking to the permit process, I know it's not on here really quickly, but I find it to be painstakingly slow. I was going to build a deck last year. I called in maybe May, June, and they said it would take up to 2 months for them to come out and even check out the process. Then I applied for a fire permit this year 3 weeks ago, and I called, and there was just zero record of me ever calling or submitting application. And someone who was able to come out the day of, and I just thought that was a little bit kind of ridiculous. So if we could just potentially work on the speed of permits, and again, it's already stressful enough to try and get a project like a deck or a fence completed, let alone having to wait 2 to 3 months or 3 to 4 weeks to get a fire permit or a deck permit accepted. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other comments for the public hearing? We will close the public hearing at 9:22. Justin, do we still have a fire pit permit? I thought y'all got rid of that, Dan.
No.
No?
We still have it.
Okay,
We do.
never mind.
Yeah.
And
I'm not a council anymore. I
I'll
don't know.
definitely take your name and information for sure and connect you
Thank
with our building official. I would say it's a bummer that took that long. I would say that last May, I believe that was probably the timeline. It was.
You were without building officials last year.
Yes. So now we have a true building official, and we have plan review in-house and also through Safe Built. And I would say that really we've been turning things around in 2 to 3 weeks now, but really that's been more of like a October development. So I mean, I believe it was probably 2 months, which is, not exactly business or residents or business or customer service friendly. So.
You don't need a garage sale permit anymore, but if you want to burn it.
You do need for a fire pit. All right. So I'm going to burn my couch. Okay. Thank you, though, for sharing. And we often, I shouldn't say often, but we occasionally do get comments at public comments, that are outside of the purview of the Planning Commission, but we can always refer them often even to someone in the room. So thanks, Mike. So, do we want to go in order? Or does anyone, I only have 2 questions. Does anyone just want to jump in? Their first question sounds like Brent and I have a similar one about pools and lot coverage.
Go ahead.
Justin, you think that pools, and I'm not talking about the inflatable ones, but that pools are part of your impervious surface?
I do.
Okay.
I will double check, but
I know one house in particular that has the world's largest in-ground pool, and it takes up their whole backyard. But that said, that's a pre-existing issue. So I guess I'm comfortable. I don't know why that spacing was put in the first place. I'm comfortable with the changes you've proposed as long as any type of permanent or semi-permanent structure, like an above-ground or an in-ground pool that has some sort of structure to it, is considered impervious surface.
yeah, I just want to double check, but I believe that somewhere in here it does say must comply with the zoning requirements for that district, which would fall under that, just like garages or sheds.
The other question is on the front porches and setbacks, and I just want to make sure that I understand, and I'll flip to the page in the ordinance too, but talk to me again about the maximum 5 feet projection into the front yard.
Sure. And maybe it might be helpful if I bring up an example. So,
Okay.
Academy Street between Woodward and Paxton. That was one recently where we had to look at the average depths and all of that. So the average front yard setback, which is inclusive of the porch, was 16.5 feet. So that gave the designer plus or minus 3 feet. I think in that instance they chose 3 feet. They took the benefit of it, so 13.5 feet was where the front of the
Porch, not the approach.
porch would be. So in this instance, they would. Just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So then the front porch would be allowed to project, but it would not be able to be any closer than 5 feet from the property line.
The porch or the approach to the porch? Like the step?
The steps would be inclusive of that.
I think maybe it's just the staff recommends the projections into required yards be amended to have a maximum of 5 feet into the front yard. Maybe what's throwing me is that I get it, but I would have stated it as maximum of 5 feet from the front lot line, as opposed to into the front yard. And that's, I think, where the question, I think it's page 9 of our PDF. yet permitted projections into required yards. The changes, it doesn't state whether these are maximums or minimums.
I think my page numbers are different, but
Sorry, yeah, it's the 9th page of the PDF. So it's section 24193, projections into yards, where there are a couple things that have been changed, including this thing about the 5 feet, unroofed porches, stoop stairways, and steps, 5 feet. The minimum, maximum, I guess, isn't as clear to me as what you just said, which is the porch with its steps cannot be more than 5 feet.
5 feet.
From the lot line.
Right.
More than 5 feet from the lot line?
Less than. No, less than. No.
Yes. It would have to be.
Why can't I get this out right?
Sorry, I should have
this
put
is-
less than in there.
This is the one thing that's confusing me is, I know, I get it. You want 5 feet from the lot line to the steps.
Right.
Minimum, a minimum.
Minimum,
Yes,
yes.
or more. 5 feet or more. I'm just having trouble.
Yeah, I read this as you can have steps that go 5 feet into your front yard. That's how I read it.
Yeah.
And I do have a maximum.
I get where we're going, but I'm having trouble both in the written description and in the chart. It just wasn't coming through to me as lot line, 5 feet or more, steps, porch.
So
It was coming through to me as house, 5 feet.
No closer than 5 feet to the front lot line.
No closer is what I was going for, and I can see how this is confusing. But no closer than 5 feet is what I was going for.
Commissioner Goering, did you have something on this one as well, or a verbiage suggestion?
I just still read that as the way if it's a permitted projection into a required yard, that projection would be coming off of the structure, and so if it's from the house into the front yard, it can go 5 feet into the yard.
Which means my porch can only be 5 feet in depth.
An uncovered porch that projects beyond into the yard.
Right.
Yeah.
Unroofed porches, steep stairs, and steps.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Does that include the steps?
It doesn't include this.
It does.
So you want both, actually. You want unroofed porches, steep stairways, and steps to not come more than 5 feet from the house, but you also don't want them to be closer than 5 feet from the lot line. Is that what you just described?
I don't want them to project more than 5 feet into the front yard.
From the house.
From the house, yes.
So you can't have a 10-foot porch in the front of your house.
So I guess in the example of that Academy Street, right? So let's say that they chose 16. It was 16.5 was the average. They chose 13.5. They would only be allowed to have 8.5. Would be the closest that the porch could be. Because that is a 5-foot projection into the front yard. Does that make sense?
Including the steps.
Right, including the steps. Yes.
So you have a 5-foot porch plus the steps at a maximum of 8 whatever feet, and then you'd still have 5 feet to
Right.
the lot line.
Right.
Okay, that's not what I heard, though.
Yeah, I just heard you get it.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
not what I heard, though. I heard that the porch plus the steps needs to be no more than 5 feet.
Into the no more than 5 feet into the yard.
Right, it's steps and porch.
Right.
So if my steps go up 2 feet, my porch can only be 3 feet.
Well, steps should. The way I intended to write it was that steps
This one's
would be
always tricky.
part of the uncovered porch.
Yeah. It's
Right.
Killing Porch City.
This
What's
one's
that?
always tricky.
Yeah.
Killing Porch City.
Oh, the front porch fest or whatever. Yeah. Well,
Why only 5 feet of porch? What if I want a 7-foot?
well,
Then it has to be,
From what it sounds like, you can only build a 5-foot porch.
That's right. That's what this says.
That's what it says.
if you're projecting past the allowed setback.
That's not how that
That's not what that says.
reads to me.
That reads past the house.
Right, just you're only allowed to go out 5 feet from the house, no matter where it's at.
All
I
it
gue-
says
I guess
is
what I'm-
permitted projections into required yards. So the required yard is 13,
right,
and the permitted projection is 5 feet.
right.
So if if the required yard was way further back, you could have a bigger porch.
Right. I guess I'm not trying to limit the size of porches.
This one's always tricky.
I know.
Yeah.
I was not trying to limit the size of porches. I was just trying to limit them
Sideways
being
porch.
right
Sign on it.
next to the sidewalk is what the intent was. But
Seriously, this is why my porch is sideways, because me and Derek and I've just forgotten our former building official's name, couldn't decide on this.
yeah,
So, for clarification, this used to be 0? Is that what it used
It
to be?
says here.
yeah.
Okay, so it's actually increasing the size of porches. We're not, this has nothing to do with a covered porch. A covered porch is, that's not actually in discussion. This is for an uncovered porch or a stoop.
Right.
So whether it's covered or enclosed, that's not this.
Right.
The covered
Then only if it was enclosed, not just if it's just covered.
enclosed makes it part of
Right.
the
Building.
lot coverage, and the enclosed would have to be part of that, like 13 and a half.
Your front setback.
Yeah.
Or your
in
front-
that example.
If it's only if it's enclosed.
Right.
Completely.
Then it's like habitable space.
What if I wanted
You
to put
what
a
makes
medical
more
marijuana
porches?
facility? Covered porch, 5 feet from the
Only if it's a grow operation.
I guess I'd say do what makes more porches, and that's where I just
Right.
tied myself in knots trying to reconcile what I was looking at in the chart with what I was reading in the text, and
Yeah. Well, I
whatever
can't see.
whatever makes more porches.
Right. Can't just say porches can't be any closer than 5 feet from the sidewalk.
But I think that's not what you were intending. That's how I read it, but that's not what you intended.
I mean, I'm not trying to limit the size. I'm just trying to keep. It seemed like when we talked in February that we didn't want them right on
Right.
the sidewalk just because of visibility.
Right,
Agreed.
right, right.
Right.
I think in my yard, I've got a good
Totally
10
agree.
feet from the porch to the sidewalk.
Right.
Which means you can see when you're pulling out your driveway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Mine as well. So if it is unclear, we can relook at that one, certainly. We wrote the medical marijuana one first, is all I can say.
Through the chair, is there a way to create a simple graphic so that everybody interprets it the same way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm very visual. That would help me too.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to do with the sign ordinance as well.
Okay.
But that makes sense.
In that case, are we comfortable making a motion about potential projections, or do you want to see it back here?
I think if we put a finding in, or a condition in that we clean up the language to be descriptive, and we can all have the same conceptual idea of what this is,
Add
I think we're fine. Just put a condition on it.
And that the intent is to promote porches
Yes.
and not reduce porches.
Yep.
Any questions or discussion on any of the other items? I think we have 6 or 7 here. Sound right? Councilman Martin, any other?
No.
Commissioner Gurry?
I feel like we've waived it on this one.
Commissioner Farr?
Nothing.
Casio? Brazen, Nazar?
Start making motions.
My only ones were pools and fences. Not fences. Those was fences. Pools and
Porches.
pools and porches.
Look, I did the lead motion. Somebody take this.
I'll do this. I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the amendment, I'm just going to go straight down the list here, of the amendment to Article 3 Residential Districts. The City Council has summarized below with the following findings as listed in the packet.
Support. Thank you. That is a motion from Commissioner Farr with a second from Commissioner Brazen. Any discussion on that motion? All right, a roll call vote, please.
Okay. Commissioners Goering,
Yes.
Azar,
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Farr,
Yes.
Casio,
Yes.
Baker.
Yes, that motion passes.
Through the chair, just for the upcoming motions, I just noticed that the bullets continued on, so
Yeah.
findings, it should be A, B, and the fences not.
Not CD.
Yes.
Thank you. Whoever would like to make the motion can make
Was
that
there any
motion.
additions to fences?
No, I think the
All right.
additions is in projections.
I move the Planning Commission recommend approval of the amendment to fences, Section 24-189, Section 3, Article 9, General Provisions. The City Council has summarized below with the following findings. just renumbered or relettered as A and B.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a motion by Commissioner Farr with a second by Commissioner Azar.
You know, I
Is
have
there
a
any
point of
discussion
clarification on this
Please,
one.
thank you.
Yeah, for finding A, the second sentence where it says fences in excess of 6 feet shall not be constructed, is that even needed anymore? I know that was changed from 4 to 6, but now it's not. It's a non-issue because we're just saying. I think we just should delete that point.
But
So-
then, do we lose
It's
all
a-
restriction?
Same thing.
Could you build an 8-foot fence then?
I think we already don't we have it specified that fences are 6 feet or no?
No.
I thought.
Yeah, that's what we're doing there.
Before it was 4, so now this is what's making it 6.
So what height can fences be?
6.
That's
6.
the only height. They can't go over 6 feet.
Correct.
They can go smaller. So we don't need to have that second sentence because a fence can't be in excess of 6 feet.
Well, that's what's keeping the front,
That's
because
what's creating the 6 feet.
the side and back's already regulated to 6. And
Right.
the front was regulated to 4, so now we're regulated.
Right.
to-
No, we don't even have to have it regulated. We can just delete it.
But nowhere else in though does it say 6 feet.
For front yard fences.
Right.
That's what it's doing.
I thought it just said fences may be 6 feet. I'll go back to it, but
Verse 24, 189.
Through the chair,
I
previously.
mean, it's just for cleaning it up, but that's. It just seems like it's unnecessary.
Here we go, 24, 189. Fences of not more than 6 feet in height may be constructed in residential
Okay.
districts with a minimum of rear side.
Because it does say rear yard before. Okay.
Are we good as proposed? Commissioner Gregg, or do you still want to strike the last sentence, the second sentence?
Hmm?
In the proposed motion, do you still want to strike the second sentence, or are you good with the proposed language?
I'm okay with it as it's proposed.
Okay, thank you. Already, any other discussion on motion, fences? All right, we'll have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Cesar,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Farr,
Yes.
Casio,
Yes.
Gurink,
Yes.
Baker.
Yes, that motion passes. There's a final motion here on projections into yards. Oh, geez.
Not so fast.
Right.
Seriously, Baker.
Oops. Never mind.
There's no motion on the table yet.
All right, so I'm going to try this one.
Okay.
I move the Planning Commission recommend approval of the amendment to projections into yards, Section 24-193, Article 9, General Provisions. City Council is summarized below with the findings as follows. A, Planning Commission held a public hearing April 18, 2018 to consider the zoning text amendment to the projections into yards ordinance detailed in the attached draft. Section A, as stated in the packet, Section B as stated in the packet, Section C to clearly identify projections into the front yard through a demonstrative aid such that it doesn't limit porches and in any fashion, but it doesn't encroach upon the sidewalk in the limiting fashion as staff has recommended. And B, the proposed zoning tax amendments are consistent with the goals and objectives of the Ferndale Master Plans.
Support. Thank you. That's a motion from Commissioner Farr, a second from Commissioner Brazen. Was that clear, City Clerk?
I believe it was.
Sorry.
Sorry you were clear.
I usually write down things and circle and hand them to her. We added this in. Any discussion on the motion? Did that represent your comment, Commissioner Azar?
Yes.
Discussion on the motion? All right. We shall have a roll call vote, please.
Okay. Commissioners Martin,
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Farr,
Yes.
Casio,
Yes.
Gurink,
Yes.
Azar,
Yes.
and Baker.
Yes, that motion passes.
All right, I move the Planning Commission recommend approval of amendment to accessory building structures and uses, Section 24-183 1E, Article 9, general provisions. The City Council is summarized below with the following findings as represented in the packet, findings being A and B instead of G and H.
Thank you. That is a motion by Commissioner Farr, a second by Councilman Martin. Is there any discussion on this motion? We'll have a roll call vote then.
Brazen? Yes. Not Williamson. Farr?
Yes.
Where am I here? Casio?
Yes.
Gurink?
Yes.
Azar?
Yes.
C. Martin?
Yes.
And Baker?
Yes, thank you. That motion passes. City Clerk, did I close the public hearing? I think I did. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, our next item is administrative items. We have one member of the audience left who missed call to audience at the beginning, and he had a question about Harding Park. So actually, Justin, I told him that I'd be happy to take his question, and that maybe there's a quick update you can give us on Harding.
Yeah, thank you guys. So I live at 3140 Inman. I'm on the west side of Harding Park. And in my backyard and then the surrounding houses are about 5 to 6 of us. It's not severe flooding, but there is consistent water accumulation after a rain, and then for, I would say, probably throughout the summer, it never really goes away.
In the park?
Yeah, and it's between the newly formed sidewalk and the fences of the houses. It extends out about 20 to 30 feet from the fence line of the house, and again, it spreads out throughout about 5 houses. I haven't really inspected the rest of the park or anything like that, but it's kind of intermittent throughout that west side. So I'm just kind of putting it out there and wondering if there's any solutions to the problem, whether or not I myself could get some dirt and sod and, send a bill to the city or something like that. Again, I'm a pretty handy man, so I could definitely take care of that myself. But my other option was just a little bridge extension from your fence out to the sidewalk of a biodegradable like mulch or something like that that can be removed at some point. So I'm also open to any other suggestions. So thank you.
Thank you. I know this has been a challenge at Martin Road Park as well, and there's obviously sort of a big process that's happening in Martin Road Park. But at Harding, there's sort of a smaller infrastructure thing that happened with some berms and some sidewalks. And I don't know if you've got anything to add or if you can help refer this to DPW and to Parks and Rec, but we certainly don't want standing water and mosquitoes, and that's what we were all just talking about with Martin Road Park.
Right,
so.
definitely not.
Yeah.
It's a new issue to me, but not surprising, really. I think that, there's a lot more flooding in general on east east of the railroad tracks, right? So have you spoken with DPW or Parks or anybody yet? No. Okay. Yeah. I'll give you a business card, and I have your info too. But I'm happy to relay that information to DPW and Parks staff. And I mean, we have a sustainability planner who also is thinking of things like that. So that's something I think, that could be addressed through probably grading, really.
Right.
But happy to relay that info too. And then I don't know if you're familiar with SeeClick Fix. Obviously, I will share this information, but SeeClick Fix is a new city app. I'll send you the link to it. But it's any issue that's city related, you can report it through pictures and sharing pictures and things like that. And Joe should be here explaining this much better than me. But essentially, you can track your request throughout the process and get feedback on it. And so I'll send an email to the team, but also put it in SeeClick Fix myself, and then we can route it. And then you'll get updates, as many as you want, I guess.
Thank you.
Can you have Joe or whomever just follow up with us with an email when it's resolved?
Absolutely.
I had just something real quick for administrative items, and Justin and Jordan already know this, but it's funny, having been an elected official where, I had a lot of one-on-one conversations with people about, particular issues that were important to them versus being an appointed official where I try to keep conversations, sort of to the whole body. Like, I don't want to have a ton more information than everyone else does. I just want to let you know that I've been trading emails with Janet Narich, who's been one of our, trading voicemails, who's been one of our commenters and questioners about the Pinecrest site. And Janet has a lot of very specific questions about DEQ supervision and remediation, that sort of stuff that she's working on with Jordan. But one of her overarching questions that I've asked for some feedback from Justin and Jordan on is what the Planning Commission's purview is around environmental issues on a site, and what we should be reviewing or thinking about. Obviously, there's a whole brownfield review process, but this is the most contaminated site, at least that I've worked with in like 12 years. So Justin and Jordan agreed that that should and could be part of our information gathering process, and that there is some information about site contamination that is over at the library. I know Janet's already read through it. I think a couple other neighbors are. They have it electronically, and I asked Jordan and Justin to just forward it to all of us so that we could all take a look at the report. It's eventually going to go on the website too, but I just wanted to mention it, that it was something that was brought up to me directly by a resident, so I just asked that the information be shared with the whole commission so that we all had it. So that's my only administrative update.
Yeah. And we've actually been, I think it's kind of been an ongoing process on what is the best way to connect and communicate with residents and business owners about all of the big projects going on.
I think you just keep getting better, frankly. So.
Well, good, thank you.
Yeah.
But we
really.
We've also had a partnership with the U of M's Citizen Interactive Design program, and their project, my group's project specifically this summer, was on how to better just send out that information, not just through a website, but also through some more, some better mailings that are easier for us to send, and also provide the legal information we have to provide, but also kind of share it in a way that it's more accessible. So their semester's almost done, so we'll be sharing that with you and sending you a website link of what that looks like. It's kind of in a beta phase, so we really want your feedback because you guys are all involved in these projects. So that site is kind of the template. That Pinecrest site is the template for how we're going forward. So great.
Thank you. All right. Any other updates this evening?
No, I appreciate all the thoughtful feedback around medical marijuana and, everything you guys are doing. I know we're meeting twice a month and asking a lot out of folks, and but I think hopefully you're all feeling like you're making an impact, but we appreciate the attention to detail. So.
Thank you. Likewise, you guys are putting in a ton of work in between these meetings. I know you're really sprinting right now, so thank you.
Thanks.
All right. I think we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, for a third year in a row, the